The House will come to order. Prayer by the chaplain.
Good afternoon. First, some scripture verses about wisdom. Joyful is the person who finds wisdom, the one who gains understanding. For wisdom is more profitable than silver, and her wages are better than gold. Wisdom is more precious than rubies. Nothing you desire can compare with her. Wisdom is a tree of life to those who embrace her. Happy are those who hold her tightly. From James chapter 1. If you need wisdom, ask our generous God, and he will give it to you. He will not rebuke you for asking. And in 1 Kings chapter 3, Solomon prayed to God, give me an understanding heart so that I can govern your people well and know the difference between right and wrong. For who by himself is able to govern this great people of yours? The Lord was pleased that Solomon had asked for wisdom. Let us pray. Heavenly Father, we need wisdom to live in this world with all the choices we have to make and the directions we could go. But those who are leaders, those who govern, especially need your wisdom in leading and governing, just as Solomon did. Lord, as you granted Solomon wisdom to lead, grant these members of the Minnesota State House of Representatives your wisdom to govern and lead, to make decisions that are just and fair, loving and truthful. Amen.
The chaplain for today is Reverend Kent Otterman, chaplain from Good Samaritan Society in Albert Lea, Minnesota, and pastor of Round Prairie Lutheran Church in rural Glenville, Minnesota, and Faith Lutheran Church in London, Minnesota. Pledge of Allegiance. Please remain standing and recite the Pledge of Allegiance to the flag of the United States of America. The clerk will take the roll.
The clerk will close the roll. A quorum is present. For what purpose does the lady from St. Louis rise?
Mr. Speaker, a point of personal privilege.
Please state your point of personal privilege.
I rise today to recognize a guest I have in the House. Today, my son, Jonathan Sandstead, is with us, and he was able to gavel in on his 10th birthday. So thank you for that opportunity, and happy birthday to John.
For what purpose does the gentleman rise?
Mr. Speaker, I rise to a privilege of the House.
The gentleman from Carver, please state your privilege of the House.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker and members, I rise today to recognize one of our own. Mr. Alger, if you would rise. Please, sir. We are here recognizing, and we do have a House resolution that we will be reading later under motions and resolutions, but we wanted to take this moment while Steve's family is here to recognize his 13 years of service to the Minnesota House of Representatives and to our high school PAGE program. We don't know the official number, but it's somewhere over 1,000 students that Mr. Alger has shepherded through the program, bringing them around to our offices, arranging the pictures, getting them to meet the governor and all of us. He is truly one of the unsung heroes of the House. So members, if you would please join me and rise and give one moment of appreciation to Mr. Steve Alger.
For what purpose does the gentleman rise?
Mr. Speaker, I rise for a point of personal privilege.
The gentleman from Blue Earth, please state your point of personal privilege.
I'd like to recognize the group right up there in the gallery. They are the Student Senate from Minnesota State Mankato.
The clerk will read the journal of the preceding day.
Journal of the House, 90th Session, 2017, 16th day, St. Paul, Minnesota, Wednesday, February 15th, 2017.
If there is no objection, further reading of the journal will be dispensed with, and the journal will be approved as corrected by the chief clerk. Hearing no objection, the journal is approved as corrected by the chief clerk. Reports of standing committees and divisions. A copy of this order of business has been placed on each member's desk. If there's no objection, the reports will be adopted. Hearing no objection, the reports are adopted. For what purpose does the gentleman rise?
I rise, Mr. Speaker, for a point of personal privilege.
The gentleman from Scott, please state your point of personal privilege.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and unfortunately I didn't get called on before because people are probably surprised that I'm standing in the first place here. I haven't been doing this too often. In any case, I rise today to recognize Belle Plains' own Ryan Dungy. Ryan is a professional motocross racer who has racked up many accolades in his career, including major and titles in both the sports, motocross and supercross. Off track, Ryan focuses on giving back through charity work, including hosting MN Major, a biking and running event that raises money for St. Jude's Children's Hospital. Please join me in commending Ryan on his accomplishments and wishing him good luck on Saturday night for his race.
Second reading of House files.
Second reading House File number 22.
Second reading.
Second reading House File number 94.
Second reading.
Second reading House File 212.
Second reading.
Second reading House File 434.
Second reading.
Second reading House File 575.
Second reading.
Second reading House File 997.
Second reading. Introduction of bills. The following House files have been offered for introduction today. The chief clerk will report the House files and give them their first reading.
Introduction of first reading of House Files 1291 through 1392.
First reading House files 1291 through 1392. Messages from the Senate.
Message from the Senate, Mr. Speaker. I hereby have the honor to inform the House of Representatives that the Senate is ready to meet with the House in a joint convention at 7 o'clock p.m. Wednesday, February 22nd, 2017, for the purposes of electing members to the Board of Regents of the University of Minnesota. And the message is signed Cal R. Ludeman, Secretary of the Senate.
Report from the Committee on Rules and Legislative Administration.
Peppin from the Committee on Rules and Legislative Administration, pursuant to Rules 1.21 and 3.33, designates the following bill to be placed on the calendar for the day for Monday, February 20th, 2017, and establishes a pre-filing requirement for amendments offered to the following bill. House File number 30.
Report from the Committee on Rules and Legislative Administration.
Peppin from the Committee on Rules and Legislative Administration offers the following report and moves its adoption. Resolved that the permanent rules of the House for the 90th session shall read as follows.
A copy of this item is on each member's desk. The lady from Hennepin, Leader Peppin.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker and members. This is the proposed permanent rules of the House. You might recall a few weeks ago we did the temporary rules. There are 4 changes we're recommending. First one, updating the names of our committees. Second, updating the names of the finance bills. Third, under Rule 1.15, this proposed change states that a motion to concur is not in order until 12 hours after the Speaker has announced receipt of the message requesting concurrence. This would be in effect except after the last Thursday on which the legislature can meet in regular session. This would increase transparency and follows the same language as conference committee reports. This is something brought to me by the minority that we worked out an agreement on, I think, and that we should all support. The final one is a change to Rule 3.33, the amendment pre-filing rule. This proposed change makes an adjustment to what we passed in temporary rules already. It clarifies language that amendments and amendments to the amendments for House and joint rules follows the same bill schedule as all other bills if they meet the requirements under Rule 3.33. Again, to provide transparency and to make sure the rules are treated like the other bills in the House. So members, I know there are amendments and I would appreciate your support on the rules, but we'll go through the amendments first.
There is an amendment at the desk. The clerk will report the amendment.
Liebling moves to amend the permanent rules of the House as follows, and the amendment is coded A02.
The lady from Olmsted, Representative Liebling.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker and members. Members, this is a simple amendment. It simply puts into writing something that I think probably doesn't really need to be said, but unfortunately, we've seen that it probably actually does. So this says, a member who has not had sufficient time to read or understand a bill must not vote on that bill and shall be excused from voting. So members, I think if you go to any of your constituents and say, what do you think? Should I vote on bills I haven't read? Should I vote on bills I haven't had time to understand? I don't think many of our constituents would say, yes, you should. But this is what happened at the end of last session. We had a bonding bill that was brought to us very late. We didn't even have time to read it. There was a $1 billion mistake in that bonding bill. There were other bills that have been brought and dropped on our desks where members have not had time to read and understand the bills. And I would argue that as members, we have an individual responsibility, quite apart from anything our caucus leaders might say, an individual responsibility to not cast a vote in the situation where we really do not know what is in a bill that we are being asked to vote on. So very simple amendment. And Mr. Speaker, I'd like a roll call on the amendment.
Roll call. Seeing 15 hands, there will be a roll call.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The lady from Hennepin, Leader Peppin.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker and members. Obviously I've had some time to read through the amendments, and I thought this was an interesting one. I've often been frustrated about people not fully understanding the bill, but I thought I'd test this out, Representative Liebling, because I think it's really important that we do vote on bills. So, I was thinking I'd ask a freshman, but then I thought, well, it's not really very fair to ask a freshman about the rules of the House, so I thought maybe I'd ask somebody on Rules Committee. So, just to see if this would work, I'm wondering if Representative Applebaum would yield to a question.
He will yield, Representative Applebaum, or Representative Peppin.
Thank you. And Representative Applebaum, I'm sure you'll know the answer to this because you are on the Rules Committee and we've already been through it in rules. So I'm wondering if you can tell the body under the proposed rules, when would the 24-hour waiting period begin for our proposed change today?
The gentleman from Hennepin, Representative Applebaum.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Would Representative Peppin repeat the question, please? I had a tough time understanding her.
The lady from Hennepin, Leader Peppin.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and Representative Applebaum. I see the minority leaders working with you there, but I'm wondering under the proposed rules when the 12-hour waiting period would begin. If you could share with the body.
The gentleman from Hennepin, Representative Applebaum.
Well, I am having a hard time hearing Representative Peppin, but I did hear you asked about 24 hours the first time, and now you just changed it to 12. So what is the question you want me to answer?
The lady from Hennepin, Leader Peppin.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And Representative Applebaum, under the proposed rules, when does the 12-hour waiting period begin? Because I'm trying to see if Representative Liebling's amendment would work or not.
The gentleman from Hennepin, Representative Applebaum.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Representative Peppin, the waiting period for what?
In the proposed rules, Representative
The lady
Applebaum,
from Hennepin, Leader Peppin.
Well, okay. Well, it would be 12 hours, Mr. Speaker, and Representative Applebaum, under the proposed rules that I just presented and that you heard in Rules Committee. And the reason I bring this forward is because this is a very convoluted amendment. I could ask some other questions about the rules, but I think we understand the point. Not only is it really difficult to make sure everybody understands the rules, and I don't mean to pick on you, Representative Applebaum. The rules are pretty boring, and I would guess if I asked that question to probably 130 members, they also would not have had any idea what I was talking about, because these things can get very convoluted. The other issue I would say with this amendment is that the language about sufficient time and understanding a bill, I'm confused about what understanding a bill is. So would Representative Liebling yield to a question?
The lady will yield. The lady from Hennepin, Leader Peppin.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And Representative Liebling, how would we determine if a member understands a bill, other than what I just did? I suppose we could ask 134 members questions like that on a bill and kind of go through some kind of a hazing thing, but how would one determine whether or not a member understands a bill?
The lady from Olmsted, Representative Liebling.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Well, Representative Peppin, I think you're having trouble understanding a simple sentence here. So it's sort of strange to me that you want to quiz everybody about the rules. This says a member has not had sufficient time. It doesn't say that you have to be quizzed on every single bill. Of course, we know that not one member is going to know every word in a bill of any size. Even the author of the bill may not. So that's really not the issue. The issue is whether you've had enough time. And it should be upon each member to decide whether that member believes that they have sufficient understanding to vote on a bill. Obviously, there's not any real enforcement. But if you think that it's okay for you as a member to vote on stuff that you haven't had time to read and understand, then go ahead and vote no. But really, Representative Peppin, I would think that you would be able to understand this simple sentence. It says a member who has not had sufficient time to read or understand a bill. It doesn't say that there should be a quiz or that a member should be held to some objective standard. We know that that's not realistic. But if you think that it's okay for you to vote on stuff that you have not read or have not even had time to read, then just go ahead and vote no.
The lady from Hennepin, Leader Peppin.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and Representative Liebling. Yeah, that's not how I read it. I read that a member needs to understand a bill or that they shall be excused from voting. And I think that would be a little problematic, and I guess you could get an affidavit to make sure somebody understood it, or maybe we could administer a quiz or something like that. But the point is, I don't think this amendment was very well thought out. I don't think it's ready for prime time. It's pretty hard to understand whether or not, to know whether or not another member understands an amendment or a bill or anything else. We have to assume that they're reading it, and we hope that they're making good faith effort to vote. But members, I would ask for a no vote on this. I think it's pretty clear that the amendment is, not very well thought out, and it would be very difficult. It would be possible to enforce, and I'm not sure how we would determine, other than maybe going through and asking every single member if they understand what we're voting on. So today, I would ask for a no vote on this amendment.
Further discussion, the lady from Olmsted, Representative Liebling.
Well, thank you, Mr. Speaker. Members, the language is very clear. If you can't understand this one sentence, then maybe you shouldn't be here, honestly. A member who has not had sufficient time to read or understand a bill must not vote and shall be excused from voting. So what the amendment really does is allow you to have a reason to be excused from voting, which right now the rules require you to vote on a bill. They do, and there's no real enforcement of that. There are plenty of times when members don't actually push the button, unless we're under call, of course. But, this is something that really falls upon each of us. There's no enforcement, and there shouldn't have to be. We each have a responsibility. If you don't think that you should have to have time, be given time to read a bill before you vote on it, I don't know what else can be said. This is a personal thing. It involves no measure of anybody else's understanding. It simply says we all have a responsibility to read and understand what we're voting on, and that we need to be, if we have not had sufficient time, that we could be excused from voting.
The lady from Hennepin, Majority Leader Peppin.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And Representative Liebling, if you could answer one more question before we vote. Would you yield to a question?
She will yield. The lady from Hennepin.
If you could define sufficient time, is that 5 minutes? Is that an hour? Is it 24 hours? What exactly is sufficient time?
The lady from Olmsted, Representative Liebling.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Representative Peppin, just like so many things in life, you have to make the decision for yourself. Each member has a responsibility to his or her constituents to decide when you've had sufficient time. What this does is says that if I as a member, for whatever reason, maybe I was out sick, maybe I had an emergency, if I don't feel I've had sufficient time, then I shouldn't be voting on the bill, and I could ask to be excused. That's really what the amendment says. There's no external measurement of it, so sufficient time is something determined by my own conscience as a member, and I really do think that we should be making those determinations for ourselves. If we're not, then again, I would say that probably our constituents have elected the wrong person.
Further discussion. The gentleman from Blue Earth, Representative Considine.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I'll rise in support of the amendment and take you back to last year, 11:30 at night, and I stood up and asked Representative Torgelson, how long is this bill? He replied 88 pages. I then asked him, how long do I have to read it? And I believe you guys called for a vote within about 5 minutes. I read pretty good, but there was no way for me to digest that bill. I looked for one thing to find if MSU was in it. It wasn't, but it was just impossible to know what I was voting on in that situation.
Further discussion. The lady from Dakota, Representative Halverson.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I also rise in support of this amendment. And sufficient time is being debated, and that might be worth being debated, but I will tell you that 0 minutes is not sufficient time. And that is what many of us had last year when during the final closing moments of the legislative session, when we were being asked to vote on millions of dollars in bonding, and we were all desperately trying to find the bill and find the language that went with the spreadsheet that we were given, because they weren't merged together for us in any printed form, and we were desperately trying to read it online, so much so that it crashed the system. We couldn't read it online, and we were being told by the speaker, it's online, read it online, it's there. It wasn't there. It wasn't available to us, and we were being asked and essentially required by our rules to vote on something that we weren't able to see. So I will tell you, members, 0 time is not sufficient time for us to read or understand a bill. And 0 time for us to read or understand a bill does not serve our constituents well. Please support the Liebling amendment.
Further discussion. The gentleman from Morrison, Representative Creeshaw.
And thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm wondering if Representative Liebling would yield for one quick question.
The lady will yield. The gentleman from Morrison.
And thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you, Mr. Speaker. Just so I understand this, we had a situation a couple terms ago where the bill author had said on the House floor, I don't know, several times. Didn't know about a provision in his bill. And I'm just wondering, to Representative Liebling, does this also apply if somebody doesn't understand their own bill?
The lady from Olmsted, Representative Liebling.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Well, Representative Creeshaw, maybe we need another rule for that. I don't know. I think the meaning of this is very, very plain, and it's up to your conscience. And so I suppose as a bill author, if you're bringing a bill and you can't understand what it says, or you haven't enough time to read your own bill, I mean, maybe we have a problem if that's the case. But I think the intent of this amendment is very clear. I think the language of it is very clear, and I would urge members to vote for it.
The gentleman from Morrison, Representative Cretia.
And thank you. And Representative Leeling, thank you for that. I heard you say, I don't know, and I heard the uncertainty. So members, I already see that this is creating uncertainty, and I would urge a no vote on this amendment.
Further discussion to the A02 amendment. The clerk will take the roll on the A02 amendment. Roll call having been requested. The clerk will close the roll. There being 46 ayes and 79 nays, the A02 amendment is not adopted. There is an amendment. The desk clerk will report the amendment.
Liebling moves to amend the permanent rules of the House as follows, and the amendment is coded A03.
To the A03 amendment, the lady from Olmsted, Representative Liebling.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker and members. Well, this is another bill that responds to a concern that we often hear about from our constituents. People often ask me, and they probably ask you, why do we bury stuff in omnibus bills when it really doesn't belong there? So this is something that, I think often chairs of fiscal committees intend to keep their bills free of policy issues. This is an amendment that puts that into the rules, and it really puts it onto the chair of the Ways and Means Committee to sort of be the filter for this. But this is intended to prevent the kind of crash and burn at the end of the session that we have so often seen, where things get buried in fiscal bills, where the governor is now put in the position of having to sign policy, stuff that's pure policy, in order to keep the state from shutting down. He's got to sign the budget bills, and things get put in there that he might object to, or whoever the governor is, or she might object to, maybe for the future. Maybe we'll have a she. So that's what this is. I think it's a matter of simply good government to say, obviously there is some policy that has to go in fiscal bills, and I think that the amendment is drafted in such a way that it's intended so that if you need policy, if you need language that enacts the fiscal piece of bills, that of course can go in there. But if it's something that doesn't belong, it should be removed.
To the A03 amendment discussion. The lady from Hennepin, Majority Leader Peppin.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker and Representative Liebling. One of the things that when I looked at, there were a couple of things that I had some questions about, and maybe you can address them in a bit. But I'm not clear who would determine what fiscally related policy is and is not. It sounds like it may be the Ways and Means Chair, and he might have some questions on that. And then also at the very end, on the last couple lines, it says that if all these things don't work, it must be returned to the Ways and Means and the committee. And so I'm wondering what happens if it gets sent to the Ways and Means Committee and then the committee doesn't decide to follow the same procedure. It seems like it's a bit of an open-ended circle. So maybe you can think through that. I do think that this has some unanswered questions, and I don't think it's ready for prime time. Maybe there's something that can be drilled through. We did not deal with this one in Rules Committee at all. It wasn't brought forward in the Rules Committee when we brought forward this amendment. So perhaps you could address those. I know the Ways and Means Chair is going to ask you some more specific questions, but those are just a few of the things that I was concerned about, and I don't think they're very clear in here.
The gentleman from Stearns, Chairman Knobloch.
Well, thank you, Mr. Speaker. And Representative Liebling, I I guess on one hand, I should appreciate the confidence you're showing in me by introducing such an amendment, because this amendment basically says that the chairman of the Ways and Means Committee, and only the chairman of the Ways and Means Committee, or chairwoman, I suppose, if there was a chairwoman in the Ways and Means Committee, is going to have the power to determine whether or not someone has a fiscal effect or is a policy provision. And frankly, Representative Liebling, I don't think I should have that much power, nor should anyone else. I don't think it should be up to one person, whoever has happened to be appointed as the chair of the Ways and Means Committee, to determine what is a fiscal provision and what is a policy provision. And of course, as you know, there are many provisions that might on their face look to be policy provisions, but actually have fiscal effect. And they might not have a fiscal effect in this biennium. They might not even have a fiscal effect in the next biennium. But down the road, they might certainly have a fiscal effect. And so, you know, we usually look at fiscal notes and revenue estimates for this biennium, but just about everything that you could look at would have some sort of fiscal effect at some time. And so I guess I would ask people to vote no on this. Members, I don't want to have this much power. I would appreciate your no vote. And beyond that, the other thing, just from a practical point of view, Representative Liebling and members, is, you know, this is the House rules debate, not the joint rules debate. And as you know, as most people know, I think everyone knows, even people who are first-term members, there's a lot of negotiating that goes on with these omnibus bills. We pass our omnibus bills here. The Senate passes their omnibus bills. They go to a conference committee. Do you really want to put yourself in the negotiating position where the Senate doesn't have this rule, and they can put in all the different policy provisions they want into their bill, but we have no policy provisions at all? So now when we go in and start negotiating with the Senate, what's going to happen? We're going to have no negotiating position when it comes to policy. We're going to simply have to try to whittle down the policy provisions the Senate may have put in without being able to get anything in its place. And so members, given that this is not a joint rules debate, but only a House rules debate, and given you shouldn't give the Ways and Means Chair, whoever that might be, this much power, please vote no.
Further discussion. The lady from Olmsted, Representative Liebling.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Would Representative Knobloch yield to a question?
The gentleman will yield. The lady from Olmsted.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Representative Knobloch, will you commit, just as an individual, as the chair of the Ways and Means Committee in the House, that you will work hard to make sure that policy provisions that are not fiscally related are removed from the bills that you pass this year?
The gentleman from Benton, Chairman Knobloch.
Well, Mr. Chairman, Mr. Speaker, Representative Liebling, no, I'm not. And you know why? I just talked about it. Among other things, there might be some very good policy provisions from your side of the aisle that I have not thought of, and no one on this side has thought of, that I think might be good to pass into state law and might be good to put in those omnibus bills. And I don't want to lose that opportunity for those good additions to our law that might come from your side of the aisle as well as my own.
The lady from Olmsted, Representative Liebling.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Would Representative Peppin yield to a question?
The lady will yield. The lady from Olmsted.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Representative Peppin, I'd like your opinion on the same question. Do you feel that it would be that you, in your role as leader, as majority leader, will you commit to trying to keep policy provisions out of the fiscal bills?
The lady from Hennepin, Majority Leader Peppin.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Representative Liebling, no.
The lady from Olmsted, Representative Liebling.
Well, thank you, Mr. Speaker and members. So I just want the public to note, often our constituents do complain about bills being buried in omnibus bills that don't belong there. And you've just heard two very senior members of the Republican caucus say that that's okay with them. And so I just want people to note, it is true that the amendment probably needs a little bit of work. It probably isn't perfectly drafted. And I was hoping that we could get a commitment from these important leaders of the Republican caucus that they would try not to do what I think most of us would agree is really not the way to run our House here. But obviously, they're not prepared to make that commitment, and I know how the numbers will fall because based on the last amendment, it appears that people will vote for pretty much, well, a lot of things if they're told not to vote for them. So I'm going to withdraw this amendment, Mr. Chair.
The amendment has been withdrawn. There is an amendment at the desk. The clerk will report the amendment.
Liebling moves to amend the permanent rules of the House as follows, and the amendment is coded A05.
The lady from Olmsted, Representative Liebling, to the A5 amendment.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And just for anybody who's watching, other people do have amendments. Mine are all just grouped together at the beginning. So this amendment is what I would call a sunshine amendment. So, members, we are, our gift ban rules do not stop us from accepting trips and from groups that are not lobbying groups, not principals. And many of us, probably all of us at one time or another, do travel on somebody else's dime. So sometimes it's a foundation that gives us a trip somewhere, sometimes for very good purposes. Sometimes there are national groups like CSG or NCSL, groups of legislators. There are very good reasons why members may be taking trips that are supported by other groups, and that's fine. I'm certainly not trying to stop that from happening. But what this amendment does is it tries to put a little sunshine on that. It tries to let the public know who's paying for us to go places and how much they're paying. And this is something that other states do. And unfortunately, I don't have the list today, but I have noticed that when I've gone to conferences and so on, that often the sponsor of the conference will tell legislators how much has been spent to sponsor their attendance at those conferences. Because in other states, some legislators do have to report that. And so what this does is simply say that that has to be reported. A member or employee of the House accepting travel or lodging allowed under this rule must report the dates and destination of the trip, value of the meals, lodging, and travel received, and the identity of the sponsoring organization, association, or individual. Then the House Controller receives the reports, shall receive the reports, and shall publish them on the House website. And of course, it exempts trips, lodging, or meals paid for by the employer or family of a member. So that would not be subject to this. So this is just intended to let the public know that if I went to a really wonderful healthcare conference that was sponsored by a foundation recently, national conference, and they paid for my travel, and I brought back, I think, a lot of value to the House because of that. But I didn't have to tell anyone about it. It's not public anywhere, and I know that almost all of us at one time or another probably do the same. And this is good. This is very good because it helps members improve their competency. It gives us subject matter knowledge. It helps us interact with legislators from around the country. But at the same time, I think it's incumbent upon us to let the public know what is going on. And so, Mr. Speaker, I would like a roll call, please.
Roll call having been requested. Are there 15 hands? Seeing 15 hands, there will be a roll call. The lady from Olmsted.
So, members, I would appreciate your support.
Discussion. The lady from Hennepin, Majority Leader Peppin.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker and members. Would Representative Liebling yield to a question or two?
She will yield. The lady from Hennepin.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And Representative Liebling, since this does change the information that would be public, I'm wondering if you had a chance to discuss this amendment with Budget and Accounting, and if it would create a new FTE.
The lady from Olmsted, Representative Liebling.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Well, I have not, but Representative Peppin, I did send these to you. You asked couple weeks ago maybe for us to let you know ahead of time what we were thinking about in terms of rules. And I sent this to you. I gave you a list. I heard nothing back from you. So, I'm sure you can find some objection to every single thing I'm offering here today. But I'm very serious about this. And if that was a concern that you really had, I wish that you would have raised it with me. My thought was that it's pretty easy to put something on a website, it just isn't all that difficult. You could just have a spreadsheet and just punch it in. I don't, they could give us some format they needed us to do it in. I just can't imagine that, unless you just think that we are going on so many trips and just that it's really a big, big deal. But I think this is just common sense, and I'm sure that we can find a way to implement it. And, if you want to find a way to say that members shouldn't have to do this, once again, I guess that's on you.
The lady from Hennepin, Majority Leader Peppin.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker and Representative Liebling. Well, I'm not unsympathetic to what you're trying to do, but there are a few problems. And I did get many suggestions from members. It was really good to get all the different suggestions and ideas. Some of them workable, some of them not very workable. I will say that this did not come up, and I was a little surprised to see it because this did not come up. No one did offer this from your side of the aisle or our side either in Rules Committee, which is where I really expected the amendments to be offered. I would also say that whether or not this is a good idea, this isn't an idea that should be for House rules. This is actually a campaign finance issue. And so this is a bill like all the others that should go through the proper committee channel. This is something that I believe would have to go through state government finance, probably civil law for the data questions that would arise. So I think that while this may be a decent idea, I don't know. It hasn't been vetted anywhere, and it does have to go through this. This is a bill idea. This isn't a House rule idea, because we can just put this on without actually going through the process. That wouldn't be right and transparent to do that. So for those reasons, members, I would encourage a no vote today.
The lady from Dakota, Representative Halverson.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And Representative Peppin's question startled me, frankly. If there is so much travel that is unreported among the members of this body that we would need a full-time employee of the state to track it, then it's something that we absolutely should be disclosing. As somebody who has gone to conferences. I've traveled on my own dime to conferences. I'd be more than happy to disclose if anybody ever paid for my travel, and the rest of us should as well. Transparency is good, and our public expects it.
Discussion. Representative Freeberg.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I was a little surprised to hear the Majority Leader's objection that this relates to campaign finance. We have provisions in the existing House rules which are being renewed here. There's a prohibition on solicitations, Rule 9.10 during the session. That certainly relates to campaign finance. This provision just requires members to report travel. The rules govern the behavior of members all the time. I certainly don't see why this provision is particularly exceptional to what's already in there. So I think members should support this common sense regulation rule, and I applaud Representative Liebling for bringing it forward.
Discussion to the A05 amendment. The lady from Olmsted, Representative Liebling.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Again, I think this is just absolutely common sense. I think our constituents expect this of us. And, I'm really surprised to hear, first of all, this really isn't, as Representative Freiberg said, this is not a campaign finance issue. This is not changing any rule about anything we can or cannot accept. It simply says that we should let our constituents know about it. And the second thing I wanted to address that Representative Peppin mentioned was that I should have somehow brought this to the Rules Committee, which I'm not on. But I did do what Representative Peppin asked, which was let her know that I intended to bring this, which I certainly was not required to do. So did not get an answer, did not get any kind of response on any of the things I raised. And, the idea that somehow there was some failure because it didn't get brought up in the Rules Committee, I don't know if maybe people have noticed, I don't only operate as a member of my caucus. I don't only operate as a Democrat. I think I tend to bring up stuff that I think will make the House better. And sometimes sometimes my colleagues don't even agree with me. So Representative Peppin, I think this is just a good government provision. And members, I think that your constituents will not be happy with you If you vote to say that you shouldn't have to reveal this, what's the big deal? What is the big deal? We're not doing anything illegal. If you're doing something illegal, you got bigger problems than this. Just let your constituents know that X amount of dollars was spent on you. Who's sponsoring you to go here, there, and wherever you're going? I think that's perfectly fair, and I'm asking members to vote yes.
Further discussion to the A05 amendment. The gentleman from Dakota, Representative Hansen.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Would Representative Liebling yield?
She will yield. The gentleman from Dakota.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Representative Liebling, is the intent of your amendment only U.S. travel? Is it the continental United States, or is it territories, or is it international travel, or what does your amendment actually cover?
The lady from Olmsted, Representative Liebling.
Thank you, Representative Hansen. It doesn't specify, but I do want to say I'm not doing this to jam anybody. This is not for me about trying to get at anybody who's gone anywhere. I mean, I think that members on both sides have taken trips. I think that those trips are mostly, or maybe all, completely appropriate. That's not what this is about. This is about going forward, that we should all know that if we're going to do this kind of travel on somebody's dime, and it could be anybody other than family or employer, if somebody's giving us the gift of a trip, even if it's completely legal, we should let our constituents know, whether it's national within the U.S. or international.
Gentleman from Dakota. Further questions on the A05 amendment? The clerk will take the roll on the amendment. Members, please vote. The clerk will close the roll. There being 56 ayes and 68 nays, the A05 amendment is not adopted. There is an amendment to the desk. The clerk will report the amendment.
Liebling moves to amend the permanent rules of the House as follows. The amendment is coded A06.
The lady from Olmsted, Representative Liebling.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Members, thank you for indulging me on all of these. Not that you probably have any real choice, but thank you anyway. So this one, again, is a very simple amendment. No committee may impose any pre-filing or 24-hour amendment deadline on filing of committee amendments. Members, the reason I'm doing this is because we have now a pre-filing rule on the House floor for bills. And I know most of you who've been paying attention, who've been around for a while, know that this is something that I have been opposed to. Actually, notably, when my caucus was in the majority. When Democrats were in the majority, this was first put into effect, and I opposed it. I voted no on having the pre-file amendment on the floor. And remember when we had that debate, Republicans who were in the minority, those of you who were here, were so upset. Some of you almost looked like you were ready to cry because you felt this was squelching the minority, and it was. But so that it went on. We lived through it when Democrats were in the majority, then Republicans were in the majority, decided to keep the rule, and here we are again keeping the pre-file rule. Well, some of us who care about how the floor works and what goes on in this body really believe, and I think there are members on the Republican side as well, believe that this has not been really very good for us as a body, because what it does is it keeps us from really doing real work sometimes. The public may not realize that when members come to the floor, most of the time we already know how we're voting. Most of the time we've looked at every single amendment that's filed and we've decided how to vote. Now, what does that have to do with this amendment? I have tried to convince members to repeal the pre-file rule for the floor. Obviously, that has not worked. But when we also have a pre-file rule in committees, we push even further back our ability to actually work together to improve legislation. What pre-file rules do is let the chair and the majority see and discuss every single amendment that's going to come forward and make decisions about it ahead of time. And it prevents members from working together on a bill, tossing ideas around, thinking about how to improve it, and then offering an amendment that comes out of that discussion. And so that's why, members, I'm asking you to consider, if we're going to have the pre-file rule on the floor, to not have it in committees, so that we can actually come to committee thinking about how to improve our work, working together, sometimes bipartisanly. In my history here, I've seen sometimes some wonderful examples of this, where people sat down, they heard testimony, they started thinking about a bill, and they had an idea to make the bill better. What the pre-file rules in committee does is it prevents that from happening. So everything is, think of it ahead of time, think of it in the quiet of your own office, offer it so that it can be decided ahead of time whether it's going to be accepted or not. This is really not good for us. It really encourages us not to think about what we're hearing. It encourages decisions to really be made elsewhere, and that's why I'm offering the amendment. And just because I know that some people may complain that I didn't bring this to the Rules Committee or something like that, this is my own idea. It's because I think this would make our work together in the House better. I know some members may agree, some members may disagree, and I'm not going to ask for a roll call on it, but I would like members to really think about this, because I think we do better work when we come to the table ready to work and think and offer amendments that may come up while we're working on a bill together.
Discussion to the A06 amendment. The lady from Hennepin, Majority Leader Peppin.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and Representative Liebling. I think we can now see what the problem has been with the amendment so far not being well thought out. It wasn't more than 10 minutes ago that we discussed, probably not even 5 minutes ago, that we discussed, and Representative Liebling, an amendment said that an amendment that says a member who has not had sufficient time to read or understand a bill must not vote on that bill and shall be excused from voting. And now we have the exact opposite here. Completely inconsistent and exactly opposite amendment, and also not one that I don't think is supported by your leader, because my understanding and the amendments that were mostly brought forward to me by leadership on your side was that you wanted more time, and that's why we made the change in the proposed rule, the 12-hour change, and we'd added the House permanent rules to the proposed changes. So I'm not really sure about how well thought out this consistency is in your many amendments here. I would just say that chairs also have had a long-standing tradition of being able to run the floor or run their committee how they wanted. We frequently hear criticism about a few people being in the room with the governor at in the 11th hour. And if we're going to put this in forward and not give the chairs any autonomy in their committee, I think that would be a big mistake, and I think that would be a step back. And I think this does go backwards in the way of making the House more transparent. So for this reason, and I'm sure there are many others I could think of if I thought about it longer, I think we should vote against this amendment.
Discussion to the A06 amendment. The lady from Olmsted, Representative Liebling.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chair. And obviously the majority leader doesn't agree, which means that probably won't pass. But, you know, this is really, this doesn't take away except a little bit of the authority of a committee chair. And again, this is only because we have a pre-file rule on the House floor. There has to be some place that members can actually think together about bills and come up with amendments. And I don't think there's any inconsistency at all. When we are in committee, we should be thinking, we should be listening to what's going on. And if we don't understand something that's being discussed, we can ask to have it explained to us. So this is something that I think it's really unfortunate that we've gotten to the place now where members never have to really think or have their brain engaged when they come to the debate, either at the committee table or here on the House floor. Thank you.
Further discussion to the A06 amendment. Seeing none to the A06 amendment, all in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed? The motion does not prevail. There's an amendment at the desk. The clerk will report the amendment.
Liebling moves to amend the permanent rules of the House as follows, and the amendment is coded A07.
To the A07 amendment, the lady from Olmsted, Representative Liebling.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. In this one, I would like a roll call, please.
Roll call having been requested. Are the 15 hands? Seeing 15 hands, there will be a roll call. The lady from Olmsted.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Well, this is my last one, members. I'm sure you won't be too unhappy about that. But this one is important. I think they're all important. There is a rule, if you look at your rules, there is a rule that says that a member may not come back as a registered lobbyist within 12 months of leaving the House of Representatives. And I believe this is something that our constituents want. They do not want us to take some job, leave the House and come right back as a lobbyist. And that's fine. We have that rule in the House rules now. The problem with it is that it's unenforceable. The problem with it is that when a member leaves the House, they're no longer subject to the rule. So we've seen over and over again, members, both sides of the aisle, again, this is not a partisan issue. This is an issue about sunshine and good government. Members should not be able to leave here and then come right back as lobbyists because they're not subject now to the House rules. That just is a catch-22 that makes no sense at all. So what the amendment does is put the enforcement back on us, members who are here, to not allow a person in violation of that rule to come back and lobby us within a year. Now, we know many of the lobbyists around the Capitol are former members. That's fine. There should be a cooling off period of at least a year. I think now in Congress, I think it's 5 years. It's much longer. But if it's good enough to be in our House rules, which it has been for quite a long time, as long as I can remember, we've had the House rule that says that members can't come back as a lobbyist. Let's make it so that it's actually enforceable, so that it actually means something. So it's as simple as that, members. The amendment says that it says no member or staff of the House of Representatives shall conduct business with, have meetings with, allow testimony, draft legislation or amendments to legislation, or discuss legislation with a lobbyist who has registered and is lobbying within 12 months of their last day of service as a state legislator. So it just puts the responsibility on those of us who are here, who are covered by the rules, to make sure that the rule is actually meaningful. Thank you.
Discussion to the A07 amendment. The lady from Hennepin, Majority Leader Peppin.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and Representative Liebling. Would you yield to a few questions?
She will yield. The lady from Hennepin.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and Representative Liebling. I mean, I think you make some good points, but I do think there are a couple of problems with the amendment, as many of the amendments that we've already gone through, we've kind of talked through. But I would say, what would happen if a former legislator who's now lobbying wanted to talk to a current legislator and it was the same legislator, they had the same project? So, for example, if I left and I lobbied, broke the rules, but I'm no longer a member, so they're not enforceable. But then a new legislator came in and they wanted to work on the same project as me, or other issues, a bonding bill, or some of the same projects that I'd been working on. I don't see where this would allow that to happen. So several times I've heard members speaking about how they've worked with former legislators on continuing on projects. So I'm not sure where that would allow this to happen, and I think most of us would agree that that should be allowed, that you ought to be able to talk to your former legislator on issues. I know I can think of at least one or two members that are in that situation now, or have been in that situation. And then also, what about if it's a different issue? What if it's a former member and the former member is one of your best friends? They're lobbying and you're talking on legislation, but they're not lobbying you on that legislation. They're talking to you about something else. Would we still be held accountable? And I'm not really sure also who would enforce it. So if you could yield and address some of those questions, I'd appreciate it.
The lady from Olmsted, Representative Liebling.
Well, thank you, Mr. Speaker. And Representative Peppin, this doesn't say you can't talk to a former legislator, only one who is a registered lobbyist within 12 months of their leaving. Within 12 months. It doesn't seem like it's too much to ask. So the idea that you can't, I didn't totally understand your question about how this would stop you from working on an issue if you're new and all of that. It simply says that if somebody comes back as a lobbyist within 12 months in violation of our rule, that we, the sitting members, are responsible for enforcing that, not allowing them to lobby us. It's as simple as that. And I don't see what the problem with it is. I mean, I think that, again, Representative Peppin, you had these, you knew I was interested in this, you never responded to me, you never told me, oh, yes, it's a good idea, but let's sharpen up the language or anything like that. I just think that you come up with excuse after excuse for why you don't want to do this. This is something that our constituents expect of us. Our constituents do not like the idea that we leave here and become a paid lobbyist and come right back and lobby our colleagues, because guess what? There's a potential for corruption there. There is. And people want a little more, drain the swamp. This is drain the swamp. Where's Representative Drazkowski? Is he here? I don't see him. But, this is about draining the swamp, Representative Peppin. So I would suggest that members vote yes.
The lady from Hennepin, Majority Leader Peppin.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker and Representative Liebling. The issue I brought forward is if it's a former legislator the legislator who is no longer a legislator and is now a registered lobbyist, they're the ones breaking the rules. So if I'm the new legislator, why should I be punished and brought before the ethics committee or subpoenaed or whatever it is that you plan to do here if I'm not the one breaking the rule and I'm just trying to advocate on behalf of my constituents? And also, I don't think it's right that if you're a former legislator, you're not a pariah if you're a lobbyist. You ought to be able to talk to members, and you ought to be able to talk to them on other issues that matter to them as well. You don't go, just because you're done being a legislator, that doesn't mean your interest in public policy goes away. And I think it's wrong-headed. If the idea is that you want to make the House rules enforceable, which I agree, I don't even like that that provision. I don't think that that's the place to put it because it isn't enforceable. But that should be a statutory change. That's not something that we should try to fix in the House rules and then kind of fix it backhandedly and punish the members who are currently here. I think that would be awfully strange for us. And think about it, members, if you were not allowed to talk to the former representative in your seat after you left, you'd have to meet, what happens if you met in your district and you had a secret meeting and then I walked in and I saw it? I guess I could haul you before the ethics committee. I think that, I mean, you bring some interesting points to it, but again, I think that there's a series of amendments that haven't been very well thought out. And again, Representative Liebling, I know you're frustrated that I didn't talk to you personally on it. I have a whole spreadsheet of all the members that brought forward amendments. There were many, many, many amendments that were brought forward. From your side, I really relied on your leadership to bring forward the amendments that mattered on behalf of your side, and met with your leadership a couple of times on the issue. And you know, and frankly, I think I know why some of these issues didn't come forward, and it's because they're not very well thought out. So thank you again for bringing it forward in your ideas, but again, I would suggest a no vote.
The gentleman from Hennepin, Representative Carlson L.
Would Representative Liebling yield to a question? And I'll give you a little background.
She will yield. The gentleman from Hennepin.
The current rule says former state legislators must not register as lobbyists within 1 year from the date they leave office. And the amendment that you've brought forward, and I'm inclined to support it, but I do have a concern about it. You've included staff. And for many years, this body has been somewhat cyclical. We have layoffs of staff members. Both caucuses have had to do that when you go into the majority or the minority. And then we have staff that's out looking for employment. And I think it would be very difficult for some of those staff that have been laid off to find employment if they had to tell their employer, if part of their job was to at times lobby or contact legislators to be employed. And that's what I find particularly troubling, because it is an expansion of the rule. I happen to agree with you on the legislators. I guess my question of you then, would you be open to a small oral amendment that would remove staff from the proposal?
The lady from Olmsted, Representative Liebling.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Well, Representative Carlson, I think maybe you're misreading the amendment. It doesn't apply to staff lobbying. It only applies to staff not conducting business with someone who's lobbying within 12 months of their last day of service as a state legislator. So the last line of the amendment. So I understand your concern. I actually have a bill on the same thing, and my bill does apply to staff as well. And that would be a matter for discussion if my bill got a hearing, which I expect it probably won't. But in this amendment, only legislators who are lobbying within 12 months are covered. But it does, the only thing incumbent on staff is that the staff should not conduct business with them either. So I think your concern is actually covered within the amendment as it is now.
Gentleman from Hennepin. Representative Carlson
Representative Liebling, I'm not totally sure. You know, sometimes when we've had to lay employees off, they're given notice the last part of the year and they begin to seek employment, and they still may be employed by the House. I'm just not sure about the wisdom of including staff here, but I'm not going to propose the amendment, but I think it's less than clear, even under your scenario, as to what role they could have. We actually give, and both caucuses do that, we give people time off. The election takes place in November. They're given notice that they're going to be laid off, and then they're given an opportunity to go out and conduct interviews and that kind of thing to find employment, even though they would still be employed by the House until December 31st or January 1st or whatever that cutoff is. But I'm not going to propose the amendment, but I do have a bit of a concern there.
Discussion to the A07 amendment. The gentleman from Blue Earth, Representative Considine.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Actually, I was hoping that Representative Hillstrom would yield for a question, but she just left. Do we have any other prosecutors? Mr. Pinto? Oh, there we are. Would you yield for a question?
Excuse me, who are you asking to yield for a question?
I'm asking Representative Pinto to yield for a question.
The gentleman will yield. The gentleman from Blue Earth.
Thank you. If somebody helps somebody else break the law, is that called an accessory? Accessory, what's the term for that?
The gentleman from Ramsey, Representative Pinto.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Yes, accessory or aiding and abetting, I guess it depends on circumstances, but accessory probably does it.
The gentleman from Blue Earth, Representative Considine.
Thank you, and I think that should address the majority's leader's question about why you would go after the member.
Discussion to the A07 amendment. The gentleman from Ramsey, Representative Lilly.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I wasn't planning on commenting, but I felt like our whole row should comment, and I just, I'm really not going to offer much, but I believe the speaker today has quite an amazing tie.
Thank you, Representative Lilly. Further discussion on the A07 amendment. The lady from Olmsted, Representative Liebling. Oh, excuse me, Representative from Morrison, Representative Kresha.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, or thank you, Mr. Speaker. Just one quick question, Representative Liebling, as I try to understand this, if she'll yield for a question.
She will yield. The gentleman from Morrison.
Representative Liebling, so if I'm a teacher and I decide to leave the house and I go back to teaching, am I now not allowed to work with my education group?
The lady from Olmsted, Representative Liebling.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Well, Representative Kresha, if you read the rule right now, it says that you're not allowed to be a lobbyist within 12 months. The problem is that when you leave here, the rule doesn't cover you anymore. So if you are a lobbyist, come back as a lobbyist within 12 months, there's nothing, you're not subject to our House rule. But the spirit of it is that you can't do that. I think the answer to your question is that would not be affected unless you are a registered lobbyist. So you can't come back and lobby. That's what it says. So I don't think, so while I have the floor, well, I'm going to speak again when people are done. Thank you.
The gentleman from Morrison, Representative Kresha.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And so I rise to oppose this for a couple of reasons. Number one, I don't think you're clear on that. And I think if you're an educator, you should think about this. I will also take myself as a personal example. Someone who loves to advocate for child protection. If I were to leave this house and go back and someone were to contact me and want me to work with them or the nurses or anything else, we bring institutional knowledge that can be helping people. This amendment takes that away from us. So think very carefully about this amendment, and I oppose it.
Further discussion. The lady from Olmsted, Representative Liebling.
Well, thank you, Mr. Speaker. Well, I guess Representative Kresha's point of view, I guess, is one point of view, and I just think that our constituents don't agree with that. I think they understand that when a person leaves the House of Representatives, there should be a cooling off period before we come back as a registered lobbyist. Now, that doesn't mean you can't go and work with an association you care about. Do something else for them for a year. Help them, advise them. That's not prohibited by the House rule. Just don't register as a lobbyist for a year and expect to come here and be treated like any other lobbyist, because there needs to be a cooling off period. I just want to go back again to the issue that Representative Carlson brought up. I don't understand the confusion, honestly, because it says, the only place it says staff is no member or staff shall conduct business with the person who's lobbying within 12 months of their last day of service as a state legislator. Not as a staff member, Representative Carlson, a person whose staff would not be covered by this once they leave here. It's only while they're here as staff. It just says that your committee administrator can't, do it for you to get around the rule. That's all. So this doesn't affect anyone leaving here who's not a state representative and then going into lobbying. It just doesn't cover that person. So members, again, I think this just gives teeth to the rule that's already there. It just says that those of us who are here are responsible for enforcing it as regards our own conduct. That if your buddy comes back within 12 months as a registered lobbyist, that you shouldn't do business with them in their capacity as a lobbyist. That's really what this is about. So members, I ask you for a green vote.
The gentleman from Hennepin, Representative Freiberg.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'm wondering if Representative Kresha would yield for a question.
The gentleman will yield. The gentleman from Hennepin, Representative Freiberg.
Representative Krisha, this relates to your question from earlier. I agree that, there are some lobbyists who work who do noble work, I guess I'd say. Like, I happen to think a lobbyist for the Coalition for the Homeless might be doing some noble work, whereas a lobbyist for big tobacco, maybe not so much. But if you're worried about this ability, we have this rule in place. It's Rule 9.35. It says former state legislators must not register as lobbyists within 1 year from the date they leave office. So my question is, if you think they should have that ability, do you think Rule 9.35 should be repealed? And why didn't you offer an amendment to do so?
The gentleman from Morrison, Representative Krisha.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And are you asking motive and intent, or do you have a specific question?
The gentleman from Hennepin, Representative Freiberg.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Representative Krisha, I'm wondering, you must see some sort of flaw in Rule 9.35 to make the point that you just made. I'm wondering I would like you to identify that flaw.
The gentleman from Morrison, Representative Krisha.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And I'm not sure how I see that germane to this amendment. I'm dealing just with this amendment. And my caution is, if you're going to go back to your professional life, and association people are going to contact you, are you going to be able to communicate with them? I don't believe that's clear in this amendment.
The gentleman from Hennepin, Representative Freiberg.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. This kind of says what I thought. If, we have this rule in place that says that members cannot cannot be a lobbyist within 1 year of leaving office. Clearly, we as a body have decided that they shouldn't be doing that. We think there's an inherent potential conflict and some potential unsavory action going on if a member registers as a lobbyist within 1 year of leaving office. However, this rule has no teeth, as Representative Liebling has pointed out, and that's why her rule is so important, and I encourage members to do that. Now, you raised the example, Representative Krisha, of somebody being an educator. That's fine. If they go back to be an educator immediately upon leaving office, they can meet with their legislators. The only problem happens if they register as a lobbyist, which because we already have Rule 9.35 in place, we think as a body that there is an inherent problem with that if they register as a lobbyist. So I think Representative Liebling's amendment would, for the first time, give that rule some teeth. I think everybody should support it. Thank you.
The gentleman from Dakota, Representative Hansen.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Would Representative Liebling yield?
The lady from Olmsted will yield. The gentleman from Dakota.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And Representative Freiberg brought up 9.35, and I'm trying to remember where that came from. Where did 9.35 come from? And, the years, Mr. Speaker, kind of blend together here, and I'm trying to remember who authored that. Who was the author of 9.35, Representative Liebling?
The lady from Olmsted, Representative Liebling.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Well, Representative Hansen, I'm afraid I don't know the answer to that. It's been there as long as I can recall. And, it just has become evident that it had no teeth. But, okay, well, one of my colleagues here says that it was Steve Swigum, former Speaker of the House. I don't know at what point he did that, but, clearly it's been there a long time, and as was noted, nobody's tried to repeal it. It's just that it's seems to be sometimes honored more in the breach, as they say. We've had quite a few instances on both sides of the aisle of people coming back and lobbying in violation of the rule.
The gentleman from Dakota, Representative Hansen.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And we were in the same class, Representative Liebling, Representative Lilly, Representative Peppin, and I think the answer came from Majority Leader Peppin. So maybe if Majority Leader Peppin would yield, just so we get it formally on the record. My memory's a little fuzzy on it, but I think that was something we all voted for too, but I can't remember when. But would Representative Peppin yield?
She will yield. The gentleman from Dakota.
Mr. Speaker and Representative Peppin, was it former Speaker Swigum that authored that amendment? And
the lady from Hennepin, Majority Leader Peppin.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker and Representative Hansen. Yes, my recollection is it was former Speaker Swigum, and I think it was in 2007, maybe 2007, 2008, after he was no longer Speaker. And for the record, I voted against that amendment.
The gentleman from Dakota, Representative Hansen.
Well, thank you, Mr. Speaker. And so that I appreciate that, Representative Peppin. I thought it was a completely green board, but I think it's important that people know that former Speaker Svigum authored that. And we've gone now, if it was 07, 10 years without it being enforced because there's no way to enforce it. So I think you've done a good effort here in trying to find a way to enforce this.
Further discussion to the A07 amendment. The clerk will take the roll. Let's reopen the board here. Members, please vote. The clerk will close the roll. There being 43 ayes and 78 nays, the A07 amendment is not adopted. There is an amendment at the desk. The clerk will report the amendment.
Pulowski moves to amend the permanent rules of the House as follows. And the amendment is coded A14.
The gentleman from Winona, Representative Pulowski.
Mr. Speaker, I withdraw the amendment.
The amendment has been withdrawn. There is an amendment at the desk. The clerk will report the amendment.
Freiberg moves to amend the permanent rules of the House as follows. And the amendment is coded A09.
The gentleman from Hennepin, Representative Freiberg.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. This is a very good government type amendment of the sort we've been voting on and turning down so far. This one simply says that the House and its committees may not meet during a legislative day after midnight. So this is the no legislative debate at 3 a.m. amendment. Now, many other states do this, and in fact, in some states, it's the only rule that cannot be waived. Now, meeting after midnight is certainly bad for public access. Members of the public may be interested in an issue, but not be available to watch a scintillating legislative debate at 3 in the morning. Meeting after midnight is bad for the legislative process. Poor decisions get made. Mistakes happen in bills. It's bad for legislators. We're tired and we don't do our best work, and I've heard it's dangerous. I've heard of at least one example of a legislator going home I've heard of at least one example of a legislator going home in the wee hours of the night and getting into an accident, simply because it was near the end of the session and the legislative debate was going on and on. So this, as I said, this is something that's done in many other states. We do it in our committees. If it's good enough for committees of the Minnesota House, it should certainly be good enough for debate on the august floor of the Minnesota House of Representatives. And I would encourage everybody to support this amendment.
Discussion. Lay from Hennepin, Majority Leader Peppin.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker and Representative Freiberg. I agree that it's best if we don't meet past midnight. I think we are at our best before then, and I always worry about that, especially with older members or members that have a long distance to travel. Certainly this has been an issue since I'm going forward. Unfortunately, there are a few times when we're very close. We've been debating a bill for a number of hours, and we need to get our work done. So it is in the rules that we're not to meet past midnight, and of course there's also an exception there, and I think the reason the exception was put in is because sometimes that's just simply not possible, and we need to have a little bit of flexibility. But I will say in the last few years, it has gotten markedly better than it would have been in the past. The first several years that I was here, we had several all-night sessions, sometimes in a row. I think the number of times we were here overnight, the reason I can tell is because I don't live over 50 miles, so I'd had to sleep in my office several times when that happened. But I will say in the last few years, we've really made an effort, and I would say both sides have made an effort in the last few years to not let that happen. And there are maybe a couple times last session and the session before that, that we went over, and that's an unfortunate thing that does happen occasionally, but because we do need to make sure, first of all, that we get our work done, we owe that to the constituents that we represent and to the taxpayers of Minnesota. We do need to have a little bit of flexibility, which I think the current rules allow, that will allow us to make sure that we get our work done. So for that reason, while I appreciate this amendment, and this is something that we thought about a long time, I do ask for a no vote today. Thank you, members.
Discussion to the A09 amendment. Discussion. The gentleman from Hennepin, Representative Freiberg.
Just to respond quickly to the argument that we need flexibility, first of all, I don't think anyone would disagree that we should be getting our job done in a timely manner as often as possible. It's better for the public, it leads to better legislative product, and as far as needing flexibility, I would just point out, like any rule, this rule, if it were put into place, could be waived under suspension of the rules if voted on by 2/3 majority of the House. So there is still flexibility even under this amendment. And Mr. Speaker, I would like a roll call vote on this amendment as well.
Roll call having been requested with 15 hands. Seeing 15 hands, there will be a roll call. The gentleman from Hennepin. Further discussion to the A09 amendment. The gentleman from Hennepin, Representative Hornstein.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker and members. And I just wanted to amplify one of the arguments that's been made about safety. As you know, I've been very involved in traffic safety issues as a member of the Transportation Committee, and the AAA Foundation for Safety actually has identified drowsy driving as a very, very significant problem. In fact, 96% of our constituents, of people surveyed, have identified this as a significant safety issue. 21% of fatal crashes are attributed to drowsy driving. And so not only are we putting all of ourselves at risk when we're driving around at 2, 3, 4 in the morning, we're putting our staff at risk and many others. And so this isn't, there are very important process arguments that can be made for not meeting after midnight, but there's a really important safety argument. And we actually had a member that got into a pretty serious accident. A drunk driver, I believe, hit her at 2 in the morning. And so this is just not something that we should write off as some kind of trivial problem. It's a real problem. And, we're already, I think Americans in general, and I would maybe think legislators in particular, are already sleep deprived enough. It just takes 1 or 2 less hours of sleep to seriously impair drivers. And that's also a statistic that I got from the AAA study. So members, I support the A9 amendment because it's a public safety issue for all of us. And look, we've had
we've had, our party has gone way past midnight when we've been in control. The majority currently has done that. This is not a partisan thing. It's a safety issue. So please support the Freiberg amendment.
Discussion to the A09 amendment. The lady from Dakota, Representative Halverson.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I rise in support of the amendment because I want the constituents of my district to know what's happening. Through the miracle of technology, there's a lot of us who text and email with our constituents while we're sitting here on the floor, and they're watching what we're doing, and they should be. For far too long in our history of as a state and as a nation, we were not particularly transparent. In fact, we had to remodel this building so that we provided more public space, because when this building was built, there were no rules or laws in place that the public had to be able to see what we did in committee. So there were big committee rooms where the whole public was invited in. There were small committee rooms where a few people made decisions. And over the years, we discovered that the wisdom of our constituents makes a difference in how we legislate, and we should do our business in the open during times when people can see us. And we've heard complaints on both sides of the aisle of the problems of passing bills in the dead of night. I've heard that phrase more than once. And I'm glad to hear that we're doing fewer overnights, but I know we're still doing them. I'll never forget watching the sun rise and set and rise again in my time here during one floor session. So we owe it to our constituents to not meet past midnight so that they can see what's going on. To the point that Representative Peppin made, which I think is an excellent one, sometimes we almost get there. It's almost midnight, we almost get there. We're just gonna finish a little bit of work. The body can absolutely decide to do that if needed, because the vote, the 2/3 vote is built into this particular rule. This is a good rule for our constituents, a good rule for transparency. Please vote yes.
Discussion to the A09 amendment. The clerk will take the roll on the amendment. The clerk will close the roll. There being 50 ayes and 72 nays, the A09 amendment is not adopted. There is an amendment at the desk. The clerk will report the amendment.
Hansen moves to amend the permanent rules of the House as follows, and the amendment is coded A16.
The gentleman from Dakota, Representative Hansen, would you like to take the amendment to the amendment right away?
Well, if it'd go on, I would. I think to get it in the shape that I would like, I would ask to do that, because I think it's a clarifying amendment. I would ask to do that.
There is an amendment to the amendment. The clerk will report the amendment to the amendment.
Hansen moves to amend his amendment to the permanent rules of the House as follows, and the amendment to the amendment is coded A20.
Thank you, Mr.
The A20 amendment to the amendment, the gentleman from Dakota, Representative Hansen.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I'd ask support for the A20 amendment. This is to clarify the original amendment because there were questions from members about whether the original amendment would preclude our caucuses, our respective GOP caucuses, whether their DFL GOP caucuses could be prohibited under this, or if a member was a legislator was a member of a labor organization. And that was not the intent. The A20 amendment is to get it into the shape I'd like so it's clear when we're voting on the A16.
Discussion to the amendment, the A20 amendment to the amendment. The lady from Hennepin, Majority Leader Peppin.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker and members. And I talked to Representative Hansen on this issue before. I'm not sure what the amendment itself is getting at. I'm a little bit more clear, but I think that if we're going to make this change, personally, I think it should include all groups, including this. So I would ask for a no vote on this, and I'd like a roll call.
Roll call having been requested. Are there 15 hands? Seeing 15 hands, there will be a roll call on the A20 amendment to the amendment. Discussion to the A20 amendment to the amendment. The gentleman from Dakota, Representative Hansen.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. A parliamentary inquiry.
State your point of parliamentary inquiry.
How would, Mr. Speaker, how would a member withdraw the secondary amendment? Is that possible?
The A20 amendment could be withdrawn.
So, Mr. Speaker, and Representative Peppin, we did talk on this. I was hoping that it could be clear. I think I can explain the original amendment, but I wasn't going to ask for a roll call on the original amendment because I was hoping it would be something that we could agree on and with an explanation. But I would withdraw the A20 if that would give us that opportunity.
The A20 amendment to the amendment has been withdrawn. We now have the amendment before us. The A16 amendment, the gentleman from Dakota, Representative Hansen.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker and members. I think the best way to describe this is to use an example. And I'll use a hypothetical example first, and then if that doesn't work, I'll use an actual example. Let's say that the Speaker and I want to form a caucus of the rhubarb pie loving caucus. The rhubarb pie loving caucus, and we wanted to join as members into that caucus. And as members of that caucus, we would meet and we could be talking about the wonders of rhubarb pie. I know the Speaker is working very closely there on the amendment, but let's say that we join that. And there are times, and for you new members, there are going to be times where you join together on a bipartisan, bicameral basis for caucuses. There may be, I think the one I would talk about, there was a mental health caucus that was very successful. So it's members associating with each other. The concern I have is, let's say the Speaker and I are in the rhubarb pie eating caucus, and the Pie Association says in order to be in that caucus, you have to be paying dues to the Pie Association. Or you have to sign a statement of principles or agree to the Pie Eating Association. And I don't think that's right. I think that if members want to join in an organization together, and it could be on an issue, it could be on geography, it could be on anything, they should be able to do that, and there shouldn't be a gatekeeper. There shouldn't be a condition of a gatekeeper there to say you have to be a member of this entity in order to join together to be considering an issue, whatever that issue is. And unfortunately, that actual example has occurred where members were asked to sign a statement of principles for an organization that employs a lobbyist. And I think it's awkward, I guess at best, if we join together on a bipartisan or a bicameral basis, and then we need to sign an agreement with somebody who then lobbies us back. I just don't think that's proper. And Representative Peppin, you and I talked about this. I don't have, and I hope that helps explain it. I hope that that would be something that we could agree on here, because I think it's about the free association of members, that we can work together on issues and shouldn't have gatekeepers. The lobbyists have their role, but we shouldn't have to either pay dues, and that hasn't occurred, but that I know of, but to sign a pledge to an organization that has a lobbyist. So I would ask for the support I'm not going to ask for a roll call. I'm hoping this would be something that we could do.
Discussion to the A16 amendment. The lady from Hennepin, Majority Leader Peppin.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and Representative Hansen, and I do appreciate that we had a conversation with it before. You know, I'm not really sure that I'm opposed to this amendment, but I'm not sure that it's clear enough for me to want to put them in a permanent rules. I feel like I don't understand, even with the explanation, I feel like I have a lot of questions about it. I'm not sure where other members are. I've had several members bring up to me, and they're not really sure what this is getting at. And so I worry about unintended consequences with this one. I'd like to continue discussions with this going forward, but for today, I would really appreciate it if members would vote no, just because I'm just a little uncomfortable when I haven't really had chance to work with staff or anyone, either partisan or nonpartisan on this. So for that reason, right now, I'd prefer a no vote.
Discussion to the A16 amendment. The gentleman from Dakota, Representative Hansen.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And if Representative Peppin would yield for a question.
She will yield. The gentleman from Dakota.
Mr. Speaker, Representative Peppin, if we adopt the permanent rules today, does that mean there's no more amendments to them? So if we continue this discussion, when would be the opportunity for us? I mean, could it be brought up under somewhere else in the calendar to amend the rules? Or is it we have to wait 2 years until the next legislature?
The lady from Hennepin, Majority Leader Peppin.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker and Representative Hansen. As I have stated the last couple of years, I do think that now is the time to do it, and I would prefer not to reopen them up. So it probably would be for 2 years down the road. That's assuming there's no other way to address the issue, which I'm not convinced that there's no other way that we can address the issue. Just not sure that the House rules are the place to do it. So probably, I guess the direct answer to your question is I don't intend to open up the rules again, but I would still like to talk to you more about it.
The gentleman from Dakota, Representative Hansen.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And I think it would be Representative Erickson. Would Representative Erickson yield for a question?
She will yield. The gentleman from Dakota.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And Representative Erickson, I think we've passed out a code of conduct before. Is the code of conduct a place where this could come in, where it's clear that we can be working with each other? Is that something where it could be amended, the code of conduct that has been presented?
The lady from Mille Lacs, Chair
Thank you,
Erickson.
Mr. Speaker and Representative Hansen. I think it's a possibility. The Ethics Committee has to meet, of course, and has to review this, and then Rules has to approve this. So there's a long process involved, but it's a possibility. And members, once these rules are adopted, I presume they'll be adopted tonight, then Monday you will receive a copy of the present Code of Conduct on your desks. I will ensure that you receive that. But Representative Hansen, I think I have to be a little vague in answering your question because there is quite a process to follow. But it's a possibility. Thank you.
The gentleman from Dakota, Representative Hansen.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And would Representative Peppin yield for a question?
The lady from Hennepin will yield. The gentleman from Dakota, Representative Hansen.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And Representative Peppin, and I'm sincere and serious about this. Is there a way that this could be dealt with either through leadership of both caucuses where there's some type of discussion with groups, or when members want to be forming a caucus, that there's a caution or some way of preventing this from occurring?
The lady from Hennepin, Majority Leader Peppin.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker and Representative Hansen. I don't really know the answer to your question. I'd be willing to talk with our expert staff on the issue, and we haven't really discussed it on our side. I'm not sure if you've discussed it on your side. I just think we need a little bit more information, and I'm not closing the door to it, but I just don't know the answer to exactly where else we can look at it. But I do feel like it's a little bit confusing, and I just don't want to have unintended consequences. And you know, we can continue to talk, like I said, and I can work with staff to see if there is any other way to address it. But I don't have a direct answer for you now. Which is the reason I don't want to put it into rules. I just feel like we need to be very clear and thoughtful about what rules we put in. And there's some questions in my mind, who this would impact, and I just think it needs a little bit more work.
Discussion. The gentleman from Dakota, Representative Hansen.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And I I think this is an important issue. I think it's something that we should be discussing. Majority Leader Peppin, I take you at your word that you will work on this, and I would like to continue, and anyone else that would like to, because I think this issue of gatekeepers, of organizations or entities that are lobbyists that may control, put as a condition of us working together, I think is wrong. And I would withdraw the amendment based on our discussion here and hope that we have an open discussion about this.
The A16 amendment has been withdrawn. There is an amendment at the desk. The clerk will report the amendment.
Hansen moves to amend the permanent rules of the House as follows, and the amendment is coded A18. To the A18 amendment, the gentleman from Dakota, Representative Hansen.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The A18 amendment is fairly self-explanatory. All committee chairs shall be trained biennially on committee procedures, Mason's Manual of Legislative Procedure, and committee operational norms. I'd ask for your support.
Discussion to the A18 amendment. The lady from Hennepin, Majority Leader Peppin.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker and Representative Hansen. I think it's important that chairs get trained, but I'm not sure that we need to mandate how they get trained or whether they need to go through training again in House rules. I know that the Senate brought in NCSL to work on chair training this year. Many of our chairs have already had chair experience. We didn't do that. And so I would encourage members to vote no, just because I think we need to have some flexibility and that we should be able to train our chairs in the manner that we best see fit, and I don't think it's necessary to put them in House rules.
Discussion to the A18 amendment. The gentleman from Dakota, Representative Hansen.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And my intent here is that this is a floor. You know, this is a minimum that we are requiring that the chairs know procedures, Masons, and operational norms. Kind of a simple thing. So I'm going to ask for a roll call on this one.
Roll call having been requested. Are there 15 hands? Seeing 15 hands, there will be a roll call. Discussion to the A18 amendment. The clerk will take the roll. The clerk will close the roll. There being 49 ayes and 73 nays, the motion to adopt the A18 amendment is not adopted. There is an amendment at the desk. Clerk will report the amendment.
Hortman moves to amend the permanent rules of the House as follows, and the amendment is coded A12.
To the A12 amendment, the lady from Hennepin, Leader Hortman.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker and members. This rule, this amendment would add a rule, Rule 4.06, to the House rules regarding joint targets. And the idea is that right now we only have one deadline, and that deadline is the day of adjournment. And because we only have one deadline, and we have a very large budget to put together pretty much between the dates of March 1st and May 1st, or May 20, whatever, we have seen in the last few years a real crunch of time at the end, and a lot of decisions being pushed to the very last minute. There is a point in time when the top leaders need to negotiate targets. And it used to be that that happened at the end of April. And then conference committees the chairs were given targets, and the conference committees worked out the details. In recent years, we haven't seen that practice followed. Instead, we've seen sort of brinksmanship right up until the very last minute. And I think a lot of people would acknowledge that the date of adjournment becomes a part of the pressure system. And so people don't want to cut a deal until the very last minute. This would move up the last minute by 2 weeks. And it would say that we are interested in having an interim deadline, 2 weeks before the end of session, which is when we would like our leaders, the leader of the House, the leader of the Senate, and the governor, to get their heads together and agree on joint targets, and then let the conference committees do the work. I think we have 201 legislators from all around the state who are willing and able and ready to help put together a good budget that's free of mistakes, that has an opportunity to be reviewed by the public, and that we should use the talents of all 201 legislators. And I think this rule would facilitate more involvement in the budget process by rank and file members on both sides of the aisle. So members, I would encourage you to vote in support of this rule, and it references an agreement with the Senate in joint targets on the Legislative Commission on Planning and Fiscal Policy. And I can anticipate the argument that the majority leader will make because we've talked about this before. And she's indicated that the Senate is not interested in moving in this direction, which is fine, but we can lead. We can put this into place, and if we can persuade the Senate to follow this practice as well, then we're ready and it's in place. If we cannot persuade the Senate to follow this practice, then this language is pretty much meaningless and is just in the rules. So I would say as the House, let's be a leader on trying to prevent the train wreck at the end of session and put in a more orderly process and set it up, and then let's work on trying to get our Senate colleagues to agree. And Mr. Speaker, I'd like a roll call.
Roll call having been requested. Are the 15 hands seeing 15 hands? There will be a roll call. Discussion. Delay from Hennepin. Majority Leader Peppin.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker and members. Representative Hortman was absolutely right. The biggest problem with this is that it deals with the other body. And the other body is not willing to change the joint rules, which this would require. I would tell you, though, that we have been in talks with the Senate and continue to do so, and I'm interested in pursuing joint targets and whether or not we can come to an agreement on joint targets, but I would say that that doesn't have to be in-house, that shouldn't be in-house rules, but it could potentially be in a resolution coming later. We are doing a resolution on deadlines after we do the House rules today. It's not going to be in there, but these are what we're taking up, and I anticipate there may be some amendments to those as well, but today we're going to be taking up the deadlines, and this would be a target, so we could potentially do another joint target resolution later if we needed to, or if the Senate would agree to it, but I don't believe that belongs in the House rules. I believe it would potentially go into the joint rules, and the other issue that I see with this is that if we put it in, we would have to come back, reopen up the rules every year, and put the new date in for whatever the dates are each year, and that's not really the intent of, rules don't generally have dates like that in. So for those reasons, members, I would encourage a no vote on this amendment.
Discussion. The lady from Hennepin, Representative Hortman. Leader Hortman.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker and members. I would just note that there's no specific date in the referenced in the rule. It would adjust to whatever date was picked by the Legislative Commission on Planning and Fiscal Policy.
Further discussion to the A12 amendment. Roll call having been requested. There will be a roll call on the A12 amendment. Clerk will take the roll. Members, please vote. The clerk will close the roll. There being 52 ayes and 69 ayes, the A12 amendment is not adopted. There is an amendment to the desk. The clerk will report the amendment.
Hansen moves to amend the permanent rules of the House as follows, and the amendment is coded A17.
The gentleman from Dakota, Representative Hansen.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Interesting timing, Mr. Speaker. My amendment is electronic devices ban. The presiding officer may not use an electronic communication device, cell phone, or other communication device while presiding over the floor session. I don't know if anything else needs to be said. I'm just going to leave it at that.
Discussion to the A17 amendment. The lady from Hennepin, Majority Leader Peppin.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker and members. I'm not sure about this amendment. We talked about this a little too. I was thinking about offering an amendment that would prevent all of us, because it's my belief that what's good for the goose is good for the gander. We should probably all be abiding by the same rules. And also, I'm not sure what would be considered an electronic communication device, but I'm not sure if that would be our sound system, our microphones. I think there's some problems potentially in this amendment. So members, I would encourage a no vote.
Discussion to the A17 amendment. The gentleman from Dakota, Representative Hansen.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and thank you, Representative Peppin, for not offering the A21. I want to explain why I put this forward, and I think it's something that may fall into the similar amendment that I had. Members, during the joint session where we had the State of the State, one of the presiding officers, not the House presiding officer, was on their phone pretty much the whole time during the presentation. And I think there are times when we are here and that it's not 1858 and it's not 1958, but there are times when we could put down the phone. And I would hope we don't have to have a rule to do that. I think it follows up on the decorum discussion. And Representative Peppin, when we talked about this, I think there are times where we kind of go back to be 1858, and maybe it would be good for Minnesota to try something, and one of those is coming up at the Board of Regents, where we go and we do an oral vote. We go through and we actually speak the name of the people that we're electing to the Board of Regents. And maybe that's something, and I don't know, Representative Peppin, I asked if you could search on that, if that's something in the rules of that particular joint convention, if we have the ability to set the rules to say, during something like the Joint Convention on Regents, or during the State of the State, can we either have the rule to put down the phone, or can we agree to do that? Can we agree to do that to show that we're paying attention and are focused on that? So that was what I was trying to do here with the amendment, and I don't know if Representative Peppin would yield, the majority would yield, leader would yield.
She will yield. The gentleman from Dakota, Representative Hansen.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And Representative Peppin, did you have the chance to check on if we could do something like that with the joint convention, if we have the ability to set a rule next week, or even before that, when we are all convened? If we're all convened here with the House and the Senate, we convene in the House and then we convene as a joint convention. Could we adopt a rule just for that evening where we put down the phone?
The lady from Hennepin, Majority Leader Peppin.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And Representative Hansen, we had a nice conversation about this, and I agree that it's a bit of a problem, especially when we have joint conventions, we'll be voting on the regents, when we have the State of the State. I think it is our responsibility to watch and not use electronic devices and pay attention. I have not had a chance, I've had a very busy day, and we just spoke earlier today, I have not had a chance to get an answer to your question on whether or not we are able to pass some kind of a rule. It'd be nice if we could just agree that it's probably not very polite when we have something important and we have a lot more people in the room from the Senate. It's probably not very polite to do some of the things we've done with our phones and electronic devices. I don't have the answer to your question specifically, and we can continue to talk about that as well, and I can check with staff to see about that. If it were one day, for just the specific events, that may be something that we could consider as a body. But again, I wouldn't want to put that in permanent rules. It would be maybe a time-by-time thing, but I think that needs more work, and I haven't thought through or checked with our chief clerk's office to find out what would be the potential downfall of that. So, but I will get to the bottom of it and look into your question, and thank you for bringing it forward.
John from Dakota, Representative Hansen.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and with that, I would withdraw the amendment.
The A17 amendment has been withdrawn. There's an amendment at the desk. Clerk will report the amendment.
Lesh moves to amend the permanent rules of the House as follows, and the amendment is coded A01.
The gentleman from Ramsey, Representative Lesh.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I ask for a call of the House.
Call of the House having been requested. Are there 10 hands? Seeing 10 hands, Representative Lesh. Oh, excuse me. Members, please check in. Clerk will take the roll.
This did not happen with the old vote.
Mr. Speaker.
The lady from Hennepin.
I move that further proceedings under the roll call be dispensed with and the Sergeant at Arms be instructed to bring in the absent members.
Representative Peppin moves that further proceedings on the roll call be dispensed with and that the Sergeant at Arms be instructed to bring in the absent members. All in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed? Motion prevails. The clerk will close the roll and the Sergeant at Arms will bring in the absent members. The gentleman from Ramsey, Representative Lesh, to the amendment.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I have an amendment to the amendment, too. Can we do that
There
first?
is an amendment to the amendment at the desk. The clerk will report the amendment to the amendment.
Lesh moves to amend his amendment to the permanent rules of the House as follows, and the amendment to the amendment is coded A04.
The gentleman from Ramsey to the A04 amendment to the amendment, Representative Lesh.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I ask for roll call.
Roll call, having requests are the 15 hands, seeing 15 hands, there will be a roll call. The gentleman from Ramsey, Representative Lesh.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, first of all, is Speaker Dowd going to be around for this? Point of parliamentary inquiry, Mr. Speaker.
Please state your point of parliamentary inquiry.
Well, Mr. Speaker, I'm wondering if Speaker Dowd is going to be taking the podium anytime here soon. Oh, can I ask him a question? Will he yield to question, Mr. Speaker?
He does not yield. The gentleman from Ramsey, Representative Lesh.
Well, Mr. Speaker, this is awkward because this amendment directly relates to his behavior. And my point of parliamentary inquiry goes directly to behavior of officers of the House, which he is one of. And so I again request as a point of parliamentary inquiry if he would then take the rostrum.
To your point of parliamentary inquiry, you're going to have to deal with me.
Well, that's unfortunate, Mr. Speaker.
Representative Lesh.
Okay. Mr. Speaker, Speaker Dowd, well, we'll say this. Representative Anderson S.
Mr. Speaker, point of order.
For what purpose does the lady rise?
Mr. Speaker, I have a point of order and I have advice.
State your point of order.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Representative Lesh is out of order under Mason Section 124.3. If you look at Mason Section 124.3,
state your advice.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Section 124.3 said, "Is not the person but the measure that is subject of debate, and it is not allowable to arraign the motives of a member, but the nature of consequences of measure may be condemned in strong terms." We need to, and then point 1 says, in debate, a member must confide remarks to the question before the House and avoid personalities. When a member is questioning a member by name, such as just happened, we are definitely arraigning the motives of members, and we are to avoid personalities. So, Mr. Speaker, this line of questioning is out of order. And I would ask you to find the point well taken.
Mr. Speaker, advice?
Advice to the Speaker, Representative Lesh.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'll refrain from saying Speaker Dowd and then say some mystery member, if that's better. It won't name him.
Further advice? As to the point of order, after reading Mason's on Section 124 and on Section 125.3, I find that the point of order is well taken. To the amendment, the gentleman from Ramsey, Representative Lesh.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. So during the GOP's caucus's efforts to make hay on the stadium debacle, which was rightfully done, accountability needed to be taken. Right about the time in December when the Sports Facilities Commission changed their policy, which would presumably have taken care of everything, the GOP caucus decided to continue to beat the drum and make political hay out of it. But awkwardly around the same time, a mystery member was found in a stadium suite, violating the same principles that your caucus professed to abhor. And I've got a press release right here regarding actions the MSFA often misuse taxpayer-subsidized suites to wine and dine friends, family members, and well-connected Democrat, misspelling there, Democrat politicians and their staff. And I would also note a quote at the bottom of that same press release: accountability, transparency, and responsiveness are fundamental to good governance and have been sorely lacking. I will make it my personal mission to close loopholes in the law, but the public must demand accountability from everyone involved, from appointed commissioners to the top political pals who scored tickets, free food, drinks, and parking on the taxpayer's dime. Now, this is a press release from the Minnesota House GOP caucus, and I highlighted those portions. So the issue here is this: there is actually a violation of the law in this instance, going to the privilege of the, not the privilege of the House, but the point of parliamentary inquiry that I raised. There is a Campaign Finance and Public Disclosure Board opinion from January of 1998. And interestingly, this opinion was signed by an individual who we all know, because within 6 months of signing this opinion, that individual was appointed by a Republican governor to the Minnesota Court of Appeals. And 6 years later was elevated to the Supreme Court by a Republican governor. So you guys should love this, should love the opinion. The opinion said, because an inquiry was made of a person who owns some of these seats at suites, at these sporting events, and said, is this a violation if I'm offering preferred access to my well-heeled friends? Is this a violation? Can I do this? And unequivocally, the individual who wrote this opinion, G. Barry Anderson, who is now a justice on the Supreme Court, said, no, you cannot. You cannot dodge the gift ban by giving preferential treatment to well-heeled friends. Now, early December of last year, we had a mystery member who benefited from that and yet violated the very principle here. And Representative Peppin, I agree with you. What's good for the goose is good for the gander. So in all the efforts that were made for accountability on the MSFA, it was raised. It was raised to Representative Anderson. It was raised to yourself. That, hang on a second. It's like the GOP caucus was on this family road trip to Wally World, going after the MSFA. And they stopped at a rest stop, and they left that mystery member out the car. It was in the bathroom, and you took off out of the rest stop, and you left him and said, hang on a second, you guys. You left that mystery member high and dry, who is in violation of the very principles that you profess to abhor, and spend countless hours, press releases, dripping with partisan sarcasm in order to hold that group accountability. And that was rightly done. In fact, I heard that both heads have resigned today. That's how we hold government accountable. But you forgot about that mystery member. You forgot about it, which is why I brought this rule forth that says, hang on a second, we all know that this is illegal. The Campaign Finance Board ruling says this is illegal. You can't do that. And so the rule says what's good for the goose is good for the gander, and if it's illegal, you can't take it. Now, if we went home, let me ask this. Mr. Speaker, would Representative Barr here? She's gone. She's not here. Mr. Speaker, would Representative Anselmo yield to a question?
I believe he's not in attendance.
He's not here either? Where are all your freshmen? I know you are. I know you're here. Mr. Speaker, would Representative Frankie, is that how you say your name? Is he gone too? You got all the freshmen out of here when I stood up. Mr. Speaker, would Representative Bliss yield to a question? Where is he? Didn't we do a call of the House? Oh, there you are. Okay, good. Excellent. Thank you. Okay, would you yield to a question, Mr. Speaker?
He will yield. The gentleman from Ramsey, Representative Lesh.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Representative Bliss, if you went home to your constituents and you told them that it's illegal for a well-heeled campaign contributor like Ziggy Wilf or like Glenn Taylor to give you money, but it's not illegal for you to accept that, what would your constituents say about that?
Representative Bliss.
Mr. Speaker, point of order.
For what purpose does the gentleman rise?
I rise for Mason Section 114, number 5. A question should not be permitted that reflects upon the character or conduct of any member or upon the executive or other official. A question as to what course a member proposes to follow is not in order.
Advice. The gentleman from Ramsey, Representative Lesh.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. He said that really fast, like an auctioneer. Could you ask him to repeat that?
The gentleman from Morrison, Representative Creasy, could you please repeat that?
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And the final point, a question as to what course a member proposes to follow is not in order.
The gentleman from Ramsey, advice.
Well, Mr. Speaker, you guys are pulling out all the stops to protect your mystery member, and I commend you for that, but that's certainly not what I was asking. I simply asked him if he were queried by a constituent regarding what would happen if a member received a bribe, how they would respond. It doesn't go toward Representative Kresch's effort to stop this line of questioning whatsoever.
Advice. After having listened to the advice from Representative Creasy, Representative Lesh, members, please go to Section 114, limitation on questions. A question should not be permitted that reflects upon the character or conduct of any member or upon the executive or other official. A question as to what course a member proposes to follow is not in order, so I find that the point of order is well taken. To the amendment, to the gentleman from Ramsey, Representative Lesh.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Would Representative Bliss yield to a question?
He will yield. The gentleman from Ramsey.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Representative Bliss, can you define what a bribe is?
The lady from Hennepin, Majority Leader Peppin.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Representative Lesh continues to be out of order, and I'm sure I can find a number. I think there's a one here on being impertinent with the line of questioning.
Are you raising to a point of order?
I will. I'll rise to a point of order under Mason's. (121), a member who resorts to persistent irrelevance. And
advice, please.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Advice. Mr. Speaker, this is way over the top. Representative Lesh is talking about bribes. He's talking about illegal activity. But he's referring to a campaign finance report. And a campaign finance opinion is about an action that already happened. Representative Lesh, you full well know as a prosecutor that to frame the term in terms of illegal when it's coming from a campaign finance board opinion is a little over the top, and I think it's really misleading, and it's very impertinent to ask members questions on this when you know that a campaign finance report, it's an opinion on something that happened, not what's happening in the future. So, Mr. Speaker, I think that if Representative Lesh continues to go down this line of questioning, I think you need to take action. And furthermore, Mr. Speaker, we have an amendment before us that is dealing with, from what I can tell, the amendment to the amendment isn't even talking about members in the body. It's talking about outside individuals. And so I would like to get back to the amendment at hand. So, Mr. Speaker, I'd ask that you rule Representative Lesh out of order, and if he continues to be impertinent, that we move on to a different amendment.
Mr. Speaker,
advice to the Speaker, Representative Lesh.
I don't know what impertinent means. Mr. Speaker, that's serious advice. You clearly
Representative Lesh,
don't.
you will know it if you have it.
Mr. Speaker.
Representative Lesh.
Thank you. I haven't been able to ask a question of the mystery member who you won't let me ask a question of. You won't let me ask a question of Representative Bliss. And Representative Peppin's concerns more relate to the fact that I'm asking the questions, not that it falls under any specific rule whatsoever, which is why she used the term impertinent, which means she really just doesn't like it. So there are rules of the House and there are lines of questioning that we get to ask that are very relevant. In fact, one of the other terms that Representative Peppin used was irrelevant, an irrelevant line of questioning. And Representative Peppin, as an attorney, knows full well what relevance means. That means it has no bearing on the matter at hand. And Mr. Speaker, this line of questioning is absolutely relevant to the matter at hand. So I've attempted to raise this under a point of parliamentary inquiry, under a privilege of the House. I've attempted to ask other members questions about what they think about this, and you pulled out all the stops in order to circle the wagons around this mystery member, and that's fine, but it looks really awkward doing that. So let me just say this, Mr. Speaker. The Vikings Stadium cost approximately $1 billion. The Target Center got about $74 million taxpayer dollars. That was mostly sales taxes, which we authorized at the legislature. What's good for the goose, Representative Peppin, is good for the gander. If you're going to beat the drum on people doing improper things, no matter the partisan stripe, you got to hold every single person accountable the same way. And this amendment that I have names nobody. It doesn't have anyone's name in it.
Representative Lesh, we are on advice to the Speaker.
Well, that's my advice, Mr. Speaker.
Further advice to the Speaker. On the point of order, after having listened to advice from Leader Peppin and Representative Lesh, if you will go to Section 121.1, I find that the point of order is well taken. To the amendment, the gentleman from Ramsey, Representative Lesh.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. This amendment clearly states that if a member is going to get a benefit that no one else can get, if you're going to get cozy with a sports owner of a professional team, and if other people can't benefit from that same thing, you can't dodge the rules to cozy up with your Fat Cat campaign contributors and get that benefit, because it appears improper. It appears impertinent. And when that happens, we lose the trust of the public at large. So everyone out there knows that this state has given money hand over fist to professional sports teams. It happens not just in Minnesota, but it happens in every single state. And when that happens, people want to hold their legislators accountable and know that they're making the decision for the benefit of the state and not just for the benefit of themselves. And that didn't happen in this body. And we need to change that. And if we need to change the rules, maybe we need to change the law. But right now, we're just passing the rules. We're not even looking to make this illegal on the books for our members. We're just making it improper under the House rules. And when that happens, you're not subject to a criminal indictment. You're simply subject to an ethics complaint, and we can work it all out. And everyone knows that's tied 2-2, so nothing ever happens, there anyway. If nothing ever is, if the ruling party doesn't want it to happen, it's not going to happen. So this is an opportunity for us at least to have the rules in front of us and have the proper course of action be guided. So, members, I would ask for a green vote on the amendment to the amendment.
Discussion to the A4 amendment to the amendment. Further discussion. The lady from Hennepin, Majority Leader Peppin.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and Representative Lash. I thought your amendment to the amendment is interesting because it doesn't actually go after members, it goes after individuals. So presumably any individual out there could be hauled in front of the Rules Committee. I know you're a prosecutor. I'm not sure how many people you've prosecuted for the illegal crime of violating House rules, where we would put this. You can address that. But also I'm wondering, under your amendment then, since this would involve not us, but it would involve bringing outside people into apparently the legislature, how exactly would this work? Would I have subpoena power? Would you? Would the chair of the Ethics Committee, Representative Erickson, have subpoena power? How exactly would we hail someone in, and what would be, would we send a warrant out for them, or how? Can you run me through the process of how that works? I know you've dealt with this before as prosecutor, so maybe you can run me through that.
Is the lady from Hennepin asking the gentleman from Ramsey to yield?
I am, Mr. Speaker. If he could work us through the process.
The gentleman from Ramsey.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Perhaps I can correct you on this, Representative Peppin. This is an amendment to the amendment. So the overall amendment specifies a member must not accept a gift that an individual or private association is prohibited from giving. So that already exists under law. So this amendment to the amendment would go under that and state that members are not allowed to do this. Now, individuals or private associations, regardless of whether a lobbyist principal, that the rules under law saying that they cannot do that, those still apply. But as we are changing House rules or proposed House rules, we only have control of our own members. The only option or function for doing that is an ethics complaint, and the Ethics Committee has wide latitude in deciding to do what they will do, but I have not heard of a situation where they have demanded accountability from a non-member.
The lady from Hennepin, Majority Leader Peppin.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Well, we are on the amendment to the amendment, and if you read 1.3, it says, an individual or private association, you go on, may not give a member a gift, et cetera, and it lists them out. This doesn't say anything about us, about members of the legislature. So I guess I would like to know what exactly in this amendment, we haven't passed your amendment, this is the amendment to the amendment, so I don't think it's very clear as to what would be the crime for the outside person, the illegal bribe or crime that this would create in your world. Also, members, so, I mean, I guess you can go into more detail on that, but also I believe, Representative Lesh, I believe you have a bill on this that's gone through some of the process, and my understanding is that the Campaign Finance Board Executive Director had some concerns with this, and since you quoted the Campaign Finance Board before, I think this is the appropriate time to point out that the underlying amendment, the Campaign Finance Board took exception to it and I don't think supported it, because they said, and this is a quote from the email, it said, on line 109 and 110 of the amendment, it reads in part, if the purpose for giving the gift is due to the recipient's status as an official, it says this language requires the board to determine motive or intent when investigating a possible violation of this section if it becomes law. Motive is not always easy to determine, and for a civil violation may be a higher standard than needed. The other provisions of the gift prohibition are investigated to determine if an action occurred. This provision would require the board also determine why an action occurred. So not only is your amendment to the amendment problematic, your underlying amendment is problematic as well, and the Campaign Finance Board clearly feels so as well. And as you know, this would need to go through the process, because this is just the House rules. That actually has to go through the legislative process.
Further discussion to the A04 amendment to the amendment. Further discussion. Gentleman from Ramsey, Representative Lash.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Well, Representative Peppin, you started out by saying you don't understand this, and then you proceeded to lay out that you actually do understand what it does. So the amendment to the amendment states, regardless of whether the individual private association is a lobbyist or principal, cannot give the gift. You can't do that. Whether you went and signed up at the Campaign Finance Board or not, then it still applies to you. And then the amendment itself says that the member cannot dodge accountability by saying, well, that applies to them, the person who gave me this gift or benefit. It does, not apply to me. So that's the entire point of it. But, Mr. Speaker, Representative Peppin, this is the whole point of this. This is why this is a rule and not a law. So if you're asking the Campaign Finance Board to go imply and infer intent, first of all, they do that all the time. They're consistently inferring intent on things. But this would be telling the Rules Committee that intent would have to be established. So if a person were to get a benefit when they held a position of power or authority, and they would not have gotten that benefit if they didn't, yeah, that'll tell you that they got the benefit, the preferential treatment, because of their position. So, of course, it requires, and you're right, I haven't been a prosecutor for 15 years, there's some things that we rely upon finders of fact to determine. They're called juries. In the legislature, it's the Ethics Committee. Those are the fact finders. And among legislation, in committee, we're the fact finders. That's where we find these facts and determine what happened or what didn't happen. And unfortunately, if we're able to do this, we could actually ask the questions, but I can't ask any questions of people on the floor here to determine those facts, except for you.
Are you asking the lady from Hennepin to yield? Further discussion to the A04 amendment to the amendment to the A01 amendment. The amendment to the amendment. The lady from Hennepin, Majority Leader Peppin.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker and Representative Lesh. And I think, Representative Lesh, you know this. You're trying in your amendment to amendment to compel someone else outside of the legislature not to do something. And that's why, kind of tongue-in-cheek, I was talking about what our subpoena power was and whatnot. But the fact of the matter is, we really have no enforceable way to prevent an outside organization or group to follow our House rules. And that's why we've had some other discussion on one of the other rules we have about former members being lobbyists. It's not enforceable in House rules. You can't hold someone who's not a member of the legislature accountable to House rules, and you know it. So this amendment to the amendment doesn't even really make sense. And for that reason, members, I would encourage a no vote.
Further discussion to the amendment to the amendment. The gentleman from Sherburne, Chairman Knobloch.
Would Representative Lesh yield?
The gentleman will yield. The gentleman from Sherburne.
Well, Mr. Speaker, Representative Lesh, I'm curious why you wrote this amendment to the amendment this way. You're leaving this sort of out in it on lines 6 and 7, saying, well, it sort of doesn't apply if the purpose for giving the gift is not due to the recipient's status as a member. I mean, why didn't you just say that members can't get these gifts? Instead, you've got this motive issue in here where it's sort of uncertain, and it's going to be difficult for someone to judge what the intent of the individual or association is in giving this benefit. Why didn't you just say it's illegal or it's against the rules for people to get this benefit if they're a member?
The gentleman from Ramsey, Representative Lesh.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Well, I would have loved to have you offer that as amendment if that's what you're interested in, is expanding the amendment to something that applies that way. I would also point out, Representative Knobloch, that we have all kinds of laws that, depending on the facts in the case, could be very difficult to prove. That's why prosecutors sometimes decide not to charge a case, or they offer a plea deal, because the facts can be difficult to prove. On the other hand, there are some fact scenarios where it's clear cut. And that's what we're trying to make sure we deal with in these categories. We want to make sure that if it's clear cut, the public can see it's clear cut, the press can see it's clear cut, that this is unseemly, that we have a rule that prohibits it. And we think that it should be clear cut, so we're spelling it out right here in black and white, that if that's the case, and that's why you were given the benefit, then yes, that is against our House rules. I'm not sure why that's hard to understand. And if there's a fact scenario that could result in being difficult to prove, That's absolutely conceivable. That is possible in any law, any rule, any administrative condition, in any level of government.
The gentleman from Sherburne, Chairman Knobloch.
Well, Mr. Speaker, Representative Lesch, members, I guess I would just clearly, Representative Lesch, you're correct that when you come to violating a law, you look at intent, and that's very important. And you as a prosecutor know a lot more about this than I do. But I guess here we're talking about House rules. We're not talking about a law. And I guess it just seems to me that I guess I'm surprised you wrote it this way, because it seems to be there's sort of a loophole in the amendment to the amendment the way it's written.
Further discussion to the A04 amendment to the A01 amendment. Further discussion. Roll call having been requested, the clerk will take the roll on the amendment to the amendment. Members, we are under call. Please vote.
Mr. Speaker?
The lady from Hennepin.
Mr. Speaker, I move that those not voting be excused from voting.
Majority Leader Peppin moves that those not voting be excused from voting. All in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed? No. Motion prevails. Motion, the clerk will close the roll. I don't see another one. There being 50 ayes and 70 nays, the amendment to the amendment is not adopted. Now to the amendment, the gentleman from Ramsey, Representative Lesch.
Mr. Speaker, I withdraw the amendment.
The amendment, A01 amendment, has been withdrawn. There is an amendment. The clerk will report the amendment.
Applebaum moves to amend the permanent rules of the House as follows, and the amendment is coded A11.
The gentleman from Hennepin, Representative Applebaum.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Throughout the Minnesota House's history, ideas have been debated openly, publicly, and respectfully. While we may not agree on every issue, Every member has the right to communicate their views and the views of the constituents they were elected here to represent. Dictators throughout history, however, have silenced their opposition. This amendment prohibits the minority from being silenced through the use of a mute button that has been installed and utilized at the Speaker's rostrum. Mr. Speaker and members, I'd like a roll call.
Roll call having been requested. Are the 15 hands seeing 15 hands? There will be roll call. To the A11 amendment. Gentleman from Blue Earth, Representative Considine.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I have a parliamentary inquiry.
Please state your parliamentary inquiry.
I would like to know where the authority to put the mute button in the first place came from.
Where is the mute button? Where is the mute button? Oh. The Speaker's not allowed to answer a question such as that, so we'll do some research offline. The gentleman from Blue Earth, Representative Considine.
Could you explain that part to me?
For what purpose does the gentleman rise?
Oh, I'm sorry, Mr. Speaker. Parliamentary inquiry.
State your point of parliamentary inquiry.
I'm not clear as to what you just said to me.
The Speaker does not answer questions as far as researching various issues. So you could ask another member to yield.
Would the majority leader yield?
The majority leader will yield. The gentleman from Blue Earth.
Could you tell me where the authority comes to put the mute button in the first place? I've gone through the rules, Masons, I don't see it.
Delay from Hennepin, Majority Leader Peppin.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker and Representative Considine. My guess, as most things that apply to the House of Representatives, is that it would be the Speaker.
The gentleman from Blue Earth, Representative Considine.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. You guess? You put a mute button in and you guess where the authority comes from. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Further discussion to the A11 Applebaum Amendment. Delay from Hennepin, Majority Leader Peppin.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker and members. Thanks for bringing the amendment forward. I would just say that the presiding officer has a job, and that is to control the flow of the House. There's instances all through Masons and the rules that describe how the presiding officer can maintain decorum in the House. One of those ways is by using a gavel. As you know, we do have hot mics in our legislature, which technically we could all stand up and scream at the same time. And I think it's fine for presiding officer when there are 2 voices heard maybe for a point of order. But if 10 people or 20 people or 30 people are talking, this is a potential tool that the presiding officer could use to help do his job or her job to maintain order on the House floor.
Discussion. The gentleman from Hennepin, Representative Applebaum.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Would Representative Peppin yield to a question?
She will yield. The gentleman from Hennepin, Representative Applebaum.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Representative Peppin, how many times in the history of the Minnesota House of Representatives has a mute button been utilized prior to the year 2016?
The lady from Hennepin, Majority Leader Peppin.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker and members. Well, I've been around this body a long time. I was first elected in 2004, and many of you weren't there in 2004 and 2006 and 2008 and other years, but I was here, and I can tell you one thing I do remember. When I was in the minority between 2006 and 2010, a rule was put into place that silenced us, the majority. It put time limits on how long we could talk on issues so that we couldn't, some of us, if the time limit ran out, if members had an opinion on an issue, they weren't allowed to talk. So there were times when I wanted to talk and other members wanted to talk, but the time expired, so we weren't allowed to talk. I also remember a time on the last night of session when former Speaker Margaret Anderson Kelleher decided to control the House floor, and the Majority Leader did something that had never happened on the House floor before, as far as I know. It caused outrage. The question was called, cutting off debate. It was called several times, I can't remember the number, 6 or 7 times in the last few minutes of session. Basically the whole budget in the last hour. No, I'm not going to say that either side has been perfect on the issue, but I can say that wasn't one of the best times in House history. It didn't make any of us look good, and I think this is something to be concerned with. But I think when the last hours of session come and the presiding officer wants to allow members to speak, there is a process for doing that. And the process is what we use every other day, but for some reason it's not used on the last day of session. And that process is you wait, you get acknowledged by the speaker, and then when your turn comes, you speak. If somebody is doing something that you feel is out of order, a second member can get up and interrupt and say, Representative X was out of order when he did that. But when a lot of members stand up and speak and cut off debate, it makes it very difficult to hear the individual from speaking. And when 10, 15 people are trying to speak at the same time, it makes it difficult. Now, neither side has been particularly good at this, but I can tell you, Representative Applebaum, that there have been a lot of tools used in the past, and cutting off debate by time limits and calling the question after just a few minutes when nobody's had time to talk, that's made it difficult. Neither side has been perfect on this, but I would just say this is one tool that can provide some order in the place. So, Representative Lesch, I know you asked me to yield, but members, again, I would ask you to vote no on this amendment.
Discussion. Representative Applebaum.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And Representative Peppin, I wasn't around during those times, but nevertheless, I do know and generally believe that 2 wrongs don't make a right. So just because you disagree with something doesn't mean you can make it so and pass along whatever pain or unfairness you may thought you were receiving onto the minority party. And with regard to that question, or your answer to me, maybe you missed the day in Representative Hillstrom's legislation class where you were a student when she instructed to answer the question that's asked. So I'm going to ask again, how many times was a mute button used prior to 2016? Thank you.
The lady from Hennepin, Majority Leader Peppin.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker and Representative Applebaum. I think I answered your question the first time, and I don't think it's just about a mute button. I think it's about controlling the body. Another tool is the gavel, and that's used on a regular basis. We all know that whether or not there's a mute button, members can stand up and scream whatever they want. We heard that on the last night of session. A member stood up and was completely out of order the last minute of session and was on the tape, was not recognized by the speaker. And there are times when members don't work through the speaker like they're supposed to, the presiding officer. And this is just one tool that will allow the presiding officer, could allow the presiding officer to make sure that decorum is held in the House of Representatives and to make sure that people are following all the rules and that the process goes through and that we are able to do our work done in a respectable and efficient manner.
Representative Applebaum.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker and members. I'm done with my questions. I just ask that all members vote yes. This is a really undemocratic function that's recently been added. It's unprecedented in the Minnesota House. It's unprecedented in a democracy. I don't care about whatever may have happened in certain people's legislative careers here, but this is absolutely ridiculous, and we need to make sure that it is not used to silence the minority when you have the votes anyway. If you're going to silence us, just vote us down. Thank you.
The gentleman from Hennepin, Representative Freiberg.
Mr. Speaker.
Oh, the gentleman from Morrison, for what purpose do you rise?
Point of parliamentary inquiry.
Please state your point of parliamentary inquiry.
Mr. Speaker, the other day we had the very appropriate conversation of keeping the House quiet. What is the proper parliamentary action to lower the volume in the House so that we can have proper debate?
Well, there are several ways. I would say one is this. At the discretion of the Speaker, there are several tools that can be used. The gentleman from Hennepin, Representative Freiberg.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I found what Majority Leader Peppin said to be interesting. I mean, to me, it seems like she has just demonstrated the lack of a need to have a mute button. You know, I wasn't here when either this time limit thing was put into place or when the question was called. However, those were done and there was no mute button in place, which suggests that the mute button was not necessary unless for some reason a particular speaker is unable to effectively manage the floor. So, I mean, if you know, I was going to mention calling the question anyway. It's right there in Rule 3.13. It is a way to shut off debate. Obviously, from what I understand, it's extremely controversial. The minority gets very upset about it, as I would, currently being in the minority if somebody were to call the question on my side. However, it's there. It's a tool that can be used. And I should add, my first term, when we were in the majority, Speaker Thiessen never resorted to that. And he also never resorted to a mute button, oddly enough. So, to me, this seems totally unnecessary. And Mr. Speaker, I have a couple points of parliamentary inquiry.
Please state your points.
First question, under Mason's section 94, it says that when a member has been recognized, it's a breach of order for another to interrupt, except for certain specified purposes, a member who is speaking. Does the mute button violate section 94 of Mason's?
Representative Freiberg, that is a hypothetical question. I cannot make a judgment on a future action. Your next parliamentary inquiry, please.
Sure. This one is definitely not hypothetical. My point of parliamentary inquiry is, where is the mute button located?
Well, I just found it here. It's over here.
Okay. Thank you.
Representative Freiberg.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'm going to have to come take a look at it sometime. I haven't actually looked at the rostrum intending for it, and I only mention that just because the mute button was installed kind of when we were in it was during our interim. We were on break. Nobody was here. Nobody was notified about it. In fact, the first time it was used, we thought there was some sort of technical problem because suddenly people were not were not being heard. And I mean, if this were truly a necessary appurtenance of parliamentary process, you know, everybody should have been notified that this is happening. It wasn't. It was installed, you know, essentially in the dead of night with nobody noticing. This is not something other people, other legislative bodies do. It's not something we should do, and I think people should vote for this amendment.
Further discussion. The lady from Olmsted, Representative Liebling.
Mr. Speaker and members, the real problem with this is not that it stops us from speaking, because clearly it does not. You could push that mute button and I can continue speaking. The thing that happens, though, is that the public stops hearing me. That is the problem. This is the mute button. The use of it is to stop the public from hearing what we say here. And Mr. Speaker and members, when I'm speaking here, I represent almost 40,000 Minnesotans, as do each of us. We're not speaking here just because we like to hear ourselves talk, much as it might sometimes seem that way. But presumably, we're here speaking on behalf of our constituents. We are speaking as their representative. And therefore, for us to be silenced arbitrarily is an extreme misuse of power by the presiding officer. It should never happen. The button should never have been installed. I understand that it might have some important uses when we are not in session. But whether we're out of order or whether we've been called on, whether we have the floor, whether we don't, the public deserves to hear what's happening in this House. And when the presiding officer pushes that button, it cuts off the public's right to hear us. And that should never happen, members. And so I urge all of you to vote yes for this amendment.
The lady from Ramsey, Representative Murphy E.
Well, thank you, Mr. Speaker. I remember the first time that I witnessed or observed the use of the mute button, and it wasn't until last session, Representative Applebaum. And it wasn't when there were a bunch of members getting up and talking. It was when the minority leader at the time was giving a speech, and you know, there was disagreement about that, and suddenly his mic went cold and we couldn't hear him. It was indiscriminate and it was intentional. And to suggest that the reason why we would go forward with this is because someone else did it first, as the majority leader has suggested, you guys did it first, makes us sound like 3-year-olds, and I think we're better than that. We have, for many years, been able to manage the work of this body by working together. I had that experience with then Minority Leader Dowd, when we managed for 2 years and we got done on time, and we figured out how to work our way through debates that were long and protracted, and we made sure that there was room for the minority and the majority. And it was hard because the minority has power and so does the majority, but we worked together to figure that out. And we didn't need a mute button, and we didn't need to call the question, and we didn't need time limits. We worked together to figure it out. We're that good. We can do that, and we should show Minnesotans that. We don't need this artificial tool, this button, to hush people, to silence people. Last night, I was with Representative Ilhan Omar in her community at a mosque. I was with a rabbi and an imam and a pastor and civic leaders and government leaders and law enforcement officers and people of various faiths coming together and talking about how, despite our differences, we should be able to bridge them. For the sake of our future, we should be able to bridge them. I was so happy to join you there last night, and it was a very powerful meeting. Outside of this body, Minnesotans are demonstrating the very thing that we should be doing inside this body, which is figuring out how to bridge our differences together, drinking tea or drinking coffee or having a cookie together and talking together. But this idea of cutting people off by silencing their microphones means that we're walking away from listening to each other. And if we're not willing to listen to each other, we're not going to be able to bridge our differences in here or in matters of policy. And Minnesotans deserve more than that. They deserve better than that. And I'll remind all of us at the front of the chamber above the speaker, it says, the voice of the people is the voice of God. When we're silenced, we're silencing the people of Minnesota, and none of us should like that. That should be not okay. And for that reason, I think we should vote with Representative Applebaum. We should not use that mute button. We should eliminate that mute button and show Minnesotans that we are better than that. Thank you very much.
Discussion. Representative Fabian.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Well, I wasn't going to say anything. Representative Murphy, I'm disappointed. You know, you said that we are better than that. And I heard you say at the beginning of your thing that the using of the mute button was intentional. What proof do you have of that, Representative? Mr. Speaker, would Representative Murphy yield to a question, please?
She will yield. Chairman Fabian.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Representative Murphy, what proof do you have that the use of the mute button was intentional?
The lady from Ramsey, Representative Murphy E.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker and Representative Fabian. You know, before that happened, we didn't know anything about the mute button. We didn't even know it existed. We didn't find out about it until after the session was done in news coverage. But we do know that Representative Thiessen was in the middle of a speech and he was suddenly cut off. And no one could hear him. And that's how we know. It's called deductive reasoning. Thank you.
The gentleman from Roseau, Chairman Fabian.
Well, thank you. And members, I'm disappointed that this debate is taking place. I think that one of the things that I've done in the House floor is I've tried to conduct myself in a way that shows good decorum. I would hope that when I'm speaking on the House floor, that people will listen to me. And the people out there that we're talking about, the Minnesotans, even though the mic is cued and it's going over the TV or the radio or whatever, it's hard then to get your message across, okay? I'm not a prosecuting attorney, you know, I'm not used to doing stuff like that. But if we truly are sincere about decorum and listening to other people and being better than that, then folks, there shouldn't be 2 people or 10 people talking at the same time. We can drag this debate out and talk about this, but if we truly are sincere, we're not going to say things, inflammatory things like what was done was intentional, and we're going to stay in our seats and we're going to follow the rules and we're going to follow the decorum that we should be doing in the House of Representatives. I would encourage you to follow the majority leader on your vote. Thank you.
Further discussion. The gentleman from Ramsey, Representative Pinto.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Members, I think it's important that we set the context for this, understand. So the mute button was apparently installed in 2015. I'm not sure who in the body knew about it. I certainly didn't. There was no public announcement. During the 2016 session, there were several occasions Representative Murphy referenced when someone was in the middle of talking and suddenly it went silent. We all were wondering what was going on. Representative Fabian, perhaps that was not a use of the mute button. That's part of the challenge, is who would know. It was all very secret, certainly seemed to be. At the very least, no announcement, no nothing. At the end of the 2016 session, there was an online news site which investigated this and found out that, in fact, there had been a button installed and asked about it. And the explanation at the time had to do with acoustics in the chamber, et cetera. The fact is that this button, as has been discussed, has the ability to cut off debate. And I understand, to Majority Leader's point, various things going on 10 years ago. If we have to look back that far, so many of us were not here then. All I know is in the time that I've been here, that suddenly on several occasions, members of the minority, in the middle of talking, without other things going on, were suddenly cut off. If this was such a good idea, then it would have made sense, perhaps, to raise it to the body and have an open discussion about it. Per the conversations and questions right now, many of us weren't even quite sure where it is, what is the deal with this thing? So members, and so consistent with that, Mr. Speaker, I would at this point bring up a point of order under Rule 2.15, and I'm prepared to offer advice.
State your point of order.
Mr. Speaker, 2.15, and members, requires the proceedings on the floor of the House be recorded on appropriate audio recording medium. Mr. Speaker, when someone is in the middle of talking and a mute button is used, someone's in the middle of talking, that person continues to have the floor. Representative Freiberg made reference to this, Mason's Rule 94. And so while that person continues to talk, as Representative Liebling referred to, that person continues to have the floor. That continues to be a proceeding of the House. But when the button is pressed, no recording happens. And what is really quite important, right, is that it no longer is broadcast to the public. People are not aware of what that person who continues to have the floor is saying. So, Mr. Speaker, my advice is that you find the point well taken, because something that is on the House floor as proceeding is not at that point being recorded when there's a mute button that is in use.
Advice to the Speaker?
Mr. Speaker.
Gentleman from Morrison, Representative Kresha.
Just a point of inquiry, is the statement true that there is no recording that's happening?
Apparently, if the mute button was used and the person kept talking, there would be some of that recorded. So it still would be recorded. Advice?
Mr. Speaker, point of parliamentary inquiry.
State your point of parliamentary inquiry.
Mr. Speaker, the reference in 2.15 to an appropriate audio recording medium under the direction of the chief clerk, I assume is referencing the system that this microphone is connected to, et cetera. Mr. Speaker, just seeking confirmation of that.
It would be the two-year parliamentary inquiry would be the same answer as to Representative Kresha. Advice to the Speaker. The gentleman from Hennepin, Representative Freiberg.
Point of parliamentary inquiry, Mr. Speaker.
Please state your point of parliamentary inquiry.
If the, you stated that the, some of the audio would be picked up if the mute button were deployed. I assume that means, you know, in the background, I'm holding up this microphone here, or maybe the speaker's microphone would pick up somebody. If the mute button is deployed, standing here in the back as I am, and I want to be in compliance with the rule, should I shout really, 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 really loudly, or just kind of loudly to be in compliance with the rule?
You can do whatever you'd like. Advice to the Speaker. After having listened to advice, the Speaker rules that the point of order is not well taken. To the Applebaum Amendment. The gentleman from Ramsey, Representative Pinto.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Well, the fact is, so that's our rule regarding recording, and I understand that the information, that what was said is picked up on the Speaker's mic, Chief Clerk's mic. I do know from people who've watched video, who are watching us, that when the mute button is pressed, or when the audio is cut off, that the video that they're watching, the sound is cut off as well. So regardless of our rules, regardless of the Speaker's ruling regarding that, members of the public are not able to hear us at that point. Just like they weren't able to hear and not able to know when the button was installed in the first place. Just like we didn't know when the button was installed in the first place. And I will say, if there are members of the majority that were informed about that, if you're informed in the future about things like that, please let members of the minority know, let's let one another know, because I can tell you this member had no idea that that thing was installed. Members, if we want to be transparent with the public, it starts being transparent with things like this, when we have a device that cuts off debate. Members, I urge you to vote in support of the amendment. There are plenty of time-tested ways to control the chamber, and notice that phrase that was used many times, many ways to control the chamber. You don't need to use a physical device to do so. Please vote in favor.
Discussion to the A11 amendment. Further discussion. The gentleman from Morrison, Representative Kresha.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and will Representative Freiberg yield for a couple of questions?
He will yield. The gentleman from Morrison.
So, Representative Freiberg, you've spoken in support of this amendment, and actually, if it was written with just the mute button, I could see that. But Representative Freiberg, could you define for me, in your estimation, what other devices? Does that include the gavel, the rostrum, the microphone that the presiding officer uses?
The gentleman from Hennepin, Representative Freiberg.
It's pretty, thank you, Mr. Speaker. Representative Kresha for the question. It says there pretty clearly in the amendment, it's a device that, when used, acts to mute floor debate or silence members. You know, if a gavel's used, members could keep talking, so I interpret this to mean an electronic device similar to the one that the Speaker surreptitiously installed that silences all the members of the minority kind of at a whim that's unpredictable to us.
The gentleman from Morrison, Representative Kresha.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And Representative Freiberg, if you'll yield to another question.
He will yield. The gentleman from Morrison, Representative Kresha.
Representative Freiberg, does it say other electronic device?
Gentleman from Hennepin.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Representative Cretia, no, I said that was my interpretation. As I said, the plain language of the amendment says that a device that's, when used, acts to mute floor debate or silence members. As I said, members can keep talking if a gavel is used, so I would not interpret it to mean that.
The gentleman from Morrison, Representative Cretia.
And thank you, Mr. Speaker. And so I'll just raise this. I won't go any further, but there's a couple of problems with this amendment. We don't clearly define what another device is. We've established that the gavel could be used to bring the noise level down. We also don't say in session or out of session. And it's the presiding officer's job to keep decorum. If we have an unfortunate event that happens in the chambers that's not in session, are we taking the presiding officer's ability away to bring the noise level down to deal with that incident? So, like I said, if this was just the mute button, I could see where we're going with this, but we're taking all the tools away, and in cases that we may not be prepared for. So I would oppose this amendment.
The lady from Dakota, Representative Halverson.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And we're having a long debate tonight. Welcome, freshmen. It won't be your last long debate. But the reason we're having a long debate tonight is because rules matter and decorum matters. How we treat each other matters, and transparency matters. And so we have really important stuff to bring forward to the people of Minnesota tonight. And the principles of our democratic republic were written in such a way by people who had been silenced for so very long to protect not only those who were in power and in control, but to recognize that a strong voice of the minority is also important to a strong democracy. The fact that a mute button was installed in the House chamber for use by the presiding officer to, quote unquote, control debate should shock us all, and it should shock the citizens of Minnesota. The voice of the minority is as important to our constituents as the voice of the majority. It's our job to be the voice of our constituents as members of this republic. Anyone who takes it upon themselves to take our voice away is wrong. This rule is important for the people of Minnesota. This rule is important for the preservation of the values that this country was based upon. I can't tell you how shocked I was to read in the newspaper as a member of this body that a mute button was installed at the rostrum. And I'll tell you, this democracy has survived a lot. There are stories of debates in the United States Senate that came to blows. We've fortunately moved past that here. So there has been a history of much more heated debate. And there was a reference to the noise at the end of session last year, the year before, whenever it was. I was here. I remember that. I remember what that felt like to not be recognized. I remember what that felt like to not be able to read a bill and not be able to get recognized to say, I can't get a hold of this bill. The minority was speaking out loudly together because we were being silenced, and we owe it to our constituents to speak out. Sometimes making laws is messy. Sometimes our debate can be messy. But there is never a reason that debate should ever be cut off. There is never a reason that any voice in this chamber should be silenced at the whim of the presiding officer. I urge you, for the people of your district, for the people of Minnesota, vote yes on this amendment. Stop the use of this mute button before it becomes a habit that hurts us all.
The gentleman from Meeker, Chairman Erdahl.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker and members. And we seem to be having an endless debate about whether or not a mute button was ever used intentionally or unintentionally. Well, you know, I've been here 15 years now, and I have seen countless examples of people having their voices muted one way or another. And usually it's the majority doing it to the minority, and I've been in the minority plenty of years as well. It's, I guess, an unfortunate part of our parliamentary system. But the muting of voices, I guess, is part of what happens here. And I can remember looking over the dog pound at the end of session some years ago when we were in the minority, and when our voices were being silenced. And in a self-imposed gesture, several rows of the dog pound had put tape over their mouths as a sign of how they felt that their voices were being muted. And so we can talk about doing it electronically or whatever. There are all kinds of ways to mute voices, and this may or may not have been one of them.
Discussion to the A11 amendment. The gentleman from LeSueur, Representative Bly.
Thank you, Speaker. I'm confused. We are told that we can keep speaking if the mute button is on. We can be heard. We can be recorded. What's the purpose of the mute button? I don't get it. Why do we need it? If it's not to serve a purpose, why is it there? Thank you.
Further discussion on the A11 amendment. The clerk will take the roll. The House is under call. Members, please vote. The clerk will close the roll. All members having voted. There being 52 ayes and 67 nays, the A11 amendment is not adopted. There's an amendment at the desk. The clerk will report the amendment.
Liebling moves to amend the permanent rules of the House as follows, and the amendment is coded A08.
To the A08 amendment, the lady from Olmsted, Representative Liebling.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Well, members, this was, I had this amendment. It's basically the same one we just debated, and we need not repeat the whole debate, but I wasn't going to bring this until Representative Krisha stood up and complained about the drafting of the one that we just heard. And so I think that this takes away the excuse. This is very clear and simple. It simply says the Speaker or presiding officer shall not use a mute button while the House of Representatives is in session. So, members, I'd like a roll call on this, please.
Roll call having requested are there 15 hands, seeing 15 hands. There will be a roll call. The lady from Olmsted.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And I don't think we need to debate it further, but I think it's pretty clear. And just so that nobody can hide behind the idea that the other amendment might have been too broad or included other extraneous things, this is very clear that the mute button is not to be used while the House is in session.
Discussion to the A08 amendment. Discussion. The clerk will take the roll. House is under call. Members, please vote. All members having voted, the clerk will close the roll. There being 51 ayes and 67 nays, the A08 amendment is not adopted. Seeing no further amendments, we are now on the proposed House rules. The lady from Hennepin, Majority Leader Peppin.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I move that the call of the House be lifted.
Representative Peppin moves that the call of the House be lifted. All in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed? Motion prevails. The lady from Hennepin, Majority Leader Peppin.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker and members, for the lively discussion tonight. I encourage you to vote for the House rules. There are a couple of really important changes for transparency, and of course we updated the committee names and whatnot, which we need to do for the House rules. With that, Mr. Speaker, I would ask for a roll call.
Roll call having requested. Are there 15 hands? Seeing 15 hands, there will be a roll call discussion. The clerk will take the roll. Members, please vote. The clerk will close the roll. There being 105 ayes and 14 nays, the House rules are adopted. Motions and resolutions. There are copies of the non-controversial motions on the House desk and online. If there is no objection, we will take action on these motions first. Hearing no objection, the motions prevail. Motions and resolutions.
Senate Concurrent Resolution number 4, Senate Concurrent Resolution adopting deadlines for the 2017 session. Peppin moves that Senate Concurrent Resolution number 4 be now adopted.
For what purpose does the gentleman rise?
Thank you, Speaker. For a point of personal privilege.
Please state your point of personal privilege.
In following with the memorializing Black History Month, I wanted to take a few minutes to talk about. Oh, okay. Okay. Wait, I guess I'm being told I should wait for this. So I'll wait.
The lady from Hennepin, Majority Leader Peppin.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker and members. I move concurrent resolution number 4. This resolution sets deadlines for the committees to do the work. The resolution sets the dates as follows. The first policy deadline, March 10th, 2017. Second deadline, March 17th, 2017. And then the third deadline, the finance deadline, is March 31st, 2017. And I will just note that the Senate has already passed this concurrent resolution.
There is an amendment at the desk. The clerk will report the amendment.
Hortman moves to amend Senate Concurrent Resolution number 4 as follows, and the amendment is coded A11.
To the A11 amendment, the lady from Hennepin, Representative Leader Hortman.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker and members. I don't object to the deadlines in the Senate Concurrent Resolution number 4. I just find them incomplete. In calendar year 2011, we had really tight deadlines, and then we had conference committees sit for a month and not do anything. At the end of the 2015 session, we had really early deadlines again. It seemed like things should have proceeded in a manner where we could finish on time. And instead, the entire month of May was like a slow motion car accident. And we could all see that it was stacking up, that we were not going to finish on time. We did not have enough time to get the work done in an orderly manner. And so, members, I think that we can set up a process that makes it more likely that we will be successful. And I think there are 3 deadlines that are missing right now. And I think we should set those deadlines and send this over to the Senate. The 3 deadlines I would add would be a 4th deadline for the date that all appropriation bills had to be in conference. Right now we have a date by which the major finance bills have to be in Ways and Means, but we don't have a date by which they have to go to conference. The 5th deadline that I propose is getting a target to those conference committees. And the deadline that I propose is May 8th. This wouldn't say that we have to wait until May 8th, but it would say that at least by May 8th, let's tell the chairs of the major finance conference committees what their targets are so that they have the next 2 weeks to do the work to get the bills in order so that we can read them, the public can read them, we can make sure there's no mistakes. And then the final deadline is a date by which the conference committee reports have to finish their work and bring the bills back to the floor. Members, we have an opportunity. This is not a partisan issue. We, as the members, have the chance to say, let's put these deadlines in place. Let's put all 201 legislators to work throughout the whole legislative session. Now, it doesn't take any power away from the leaders, because the moment that they will battle it out behind closed doors, maybe at the governor's mansion or wherever, is just moved up by 2 weeks to put us on a path to do this the right way so that we don't have to worry about the mute button and people yelling at the end of session and wondering what the heck is in these 200-page bills that we're voting on, or in some cases 800-page bills. So members, if we do this together and send it over to the Senate, and the Senate doesn't want to be reasonable on this, then we can always take up Senate Concurrent Resolution number 4 again. I will tell you that I talked to the Majority Leader of the Senate, and he was interested in these deadlines. He was interested in having a discussion about adding these 3 additional deadlines. And so let's get the conversation going, and let's send this over to the Senate. And Mr. Speaker, I'd like a roll call.
Roll call having requested are the 15 hands. Seeing 15 hands, there will be a roll call. Discussion. The lady from Hennepin, Representative Peppin.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker and members, and Representative Hortman for bringing this forward. We talked about this in Rules Committee. As you know, Representative Hortman, this affects joint rules. Today we're dealing with the House rules. I've spoken with the Majority Leader and others in the Senate, and I have not gotten the impression, they've told me they're not interested. Senate President Fischbach has told me specifically that they're not interested in changing the joint rules. Have spoken with them about looking at a potential target, 4th target, and we could potentially look at that in a resolution coming forward. It would be a different one. Doesn't need to happen today. But because this would actually slow our work down, if the goal is to get our work done in time, this would actually slow our work down because the Senate already passed it last Monday. They would have to repass something again. So for these members, for these reasons, members, and for the fact that we're actually trying to deal with a concurrent resolution that affects both bodies, it would not be prudent for us to pass this amendment today.
Discussion to the A11 amendment. The gentleman from Ramsey, Representative Mahoney.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker and members and Majority Leader. You spoke to slowing our work down. Last session, we had a little bit of a snafu at the end, a train wreck or whatever you want to call it. And I've been involved in a couple of major bills that I've had less than 2 minutes to read a 200-page or 150-page bill, I think it was. And I think that was 2015 when we had to settle for a lights on at the end. Now, I understand negotiations can be hard, but if we were negotiating and the end date was May 12th, we actually could get our work done and it wouldn't be slowed down. We just might have to get better negotiators.
Discussion. The lady from Hennepin to the A11 amendment, Leader Hortman.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker and members. This won't slow us down. There's already an agreement between the House and the Senate that they're going to meet these first, second, and third deadlines. This is about having a conversation here in February of whether we're going to set up May so that we can be successful or less likely to be successful. And I think sending this over to the Senate with these proposed 3 additional deadlines gets this conversation at the level that it should be at the time in the calendar when it should be. If we're going to set good deadlines, we should do it all of us together, and we should do it early enough that people can then meet those deadlines. So members, this doesn't slow anything down. In fact, this would put a framework in place that would make it much more likely we are going to be successful in May at completing our session on time and in a manner that we can all be proud of.
Discussion to the A11 amendment. The lady from Dakota, Representative Mason.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. When I was talking to the people in my district last year and trying to explain why we didn't have a bonding bill, why we didn't have a transportation bill, the response normally is they don't care what party it is. They expect us to get our job done. Last year was an incredible failure. And I think we need to take some leadership. We need to be proactive. So this year, we end up passing all of our major bills. I mean, as it is, the feds have raised the interest rates, so everything that we need to pass is going to be more expensive. So we've already put Minnesota way behind where it needs to be. I urge you to support Representative Hortman's amendment.
To the A11 amendment, Representative Johnson C.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And members, I think I'm going to remind you of conversations that you had, assuming your neighbors are thinking like me. We heard this all the time, especially in June. You didn't get your work done. You didn't get your work done, a basic value in Minnesota. And then I would talk about these sorts of deadlines, establishing some deadlines for conference committees. And my neighbors understood what that would do. It gave possibility to improve our ability to get our work done. Think about your neighbors. Think about your constituents. They want this kind of reform. Vote yes.
Discussion to the A11 amendment. The lady from Hennepin, Representative Pryor.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I have to stand up today and I have to agree with what I just heard because that's what I heard during the campaign. They said, we were watching what happened. We saw they didn't get their job done. So it is my job as a new representative to stand on this floor today and voice my support for an act, for a step that will make it more likely that we will get our job done on time and then we'll be able to do a good job at it. Thank you.
To the A11 amendment, the gentleman from Ramsey, Representative Fisher.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I would encourage a green vote on this. I know that we heard just a little bit ago that some people say that, well, if we do that, that's going to slow things down right now. Well, I say it's better to slow things down now to get it right so we don't have a train wreck at the end of session. It was an embarrassment when we came forward at the end of last session and we had our bonding bill that did not get done and was rife with errors because we jammed it through at the last minute. It's important that we set deadlines early enough so that we can get things done. Otherwise, when we don't, we could end up with a train wreck again, and it's our fault. I don't want to be in that situation again. Let's do something differently. Vote green.
Discussion to the A11 amendment. Further discussion. The clerk will take the roll on the A11 amendment. Let's get that done. The clerk will close the roll. There being 49 ayes and 70 nays, the amendment is not adopted. To the Senate Concurrent Resolution number 4, Representative Peppin.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker and members. Please vote for the concurrent resolution.
Any further discussion? All in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed? No. Motion prevails. Motions and resolutions.
Albright move that House File number 474, now in the General Register, be re-referred to the Committee on Ways and Means.
Representative Albright. I didn't touch the mute button.
Mr. Speaker, that is my motion.
All in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed? Motion prevails. For what purpose does the gentleman rise?
Point of personal privilege.
Please state your point of personal privilege. The gentleman from Rice, Representative Bly.
Thank you, Speaker. As I started before, I wanted to speak about a person in relation to Black History Month. This is a person who I grew to admire when I was a high school student and read his novel, The Learning Tree, and then was privileged to teach the novel when I was a teacher. Gordon Parks was one of the seminal figures of the 20th century photography, a humanitarian with a deep commitment to social justice. He left behind a body of work that documents many of the most important aspects of American culture, from the early 1940s up until his death in 2006. With a focus on race relations, poverty, civil rights, and urban life, Parks was also a celebrated composer, author, and filmmaker who interacted with many of the most prominent people of his era, from politicians and artists to celebrities and athletes. Park was born in Fort Scott, Kansas, the son of Sarah and Jackson Parks on November 30th, 1912, the youngest of 15 children. His father was a farmer who grew corn, beets, turnips, potatoes, collard greens, tomatoes, and had a few ducks, chickens, and hogs. He attended a segregated elementary school, but the town that he lived in could not afford a separated high school, so he went to the high school with whites. However, blacks were not allowed to play sports or attend school activities, and they were discouraged from developing any aspirations for higher education. When Parks was 11 years old, 3 white boys threw him into the Marmaton River, knowing that he couldn't swim. He had the presence of mind to duck underwater so they wouldn't see him make it to land. His mother died when he was 14. He spent his last night at the family home sleeping beside his mother's coffin, seeking not only solace, but a way to face his own fear of death. Soon after, he was sent to St. Paul, Minnesota to live with a sister and her husband. He and his uncle argued frequently, and Parks was finally turned out onto the street to fend for himself at age 15. Struggling to survive, he worked in brothels and as a singer, piano player, busboy, traveling waiter, and semi-pro basketball player. In 1929, he briefly worked in a gentleman's club in the Minnesota Club. There, he not only observed the trappings of success, but was able to read many books from the club library. When the Wall Street crash of 1929 brought an end to the club, he jumped a train to Chicago, where he managed to land a job in a flophouse. While working as a waiter in a railroad dining car, he began seeing the portfolios of photographers in picture magazines and decided to become a photographer. At the age of 25, Parks was struck by photographs of migrant workers in a magazine. He bought his first camera, a Voigtlander, brilliant, for $7.50 at a Seattle, Washington pawn shop, and taught himself how to take photos. The photography clerks who developed Parks' first roll of film applauded his work and prompted him to seek a fashion assignment at a women's clothing store in St. Paul, owned by Frank Murphy. Those photographs caught the eye of Marva Lewis, wife of heavyweight boxing champion Joe Louis. She encouraged Parks to move to Chicago in 1940, where he became a portrait business and specialized in photographs of society women. Parks' photographic work in Chicago, especially in capturing the myriad experiences of African Americans across the city, led him to receive the Julius Rosenwerd Fellowship, which in turn contributed to being asked to join the Farm Security Administration under the auspices of Roy Stryker. He found employment with the Farm Security Administration, which was then chronicling the nation's social conditions. Parks quickly developed a style that would make him one of the most celebrated photographers of his age, allowing him to break the color line in professional photography, while creating remarkable, expressive images that consistently explored the social and economic impact of racism. When the FSA closed in 1943, Parks became a freelance photographer, balancing work for fashion magazines with his passion for documenting humanitarian issues. His 1948 photo essay of the life of a Harlem gang leader won him widespread acclaim and a position at the first African-American staff photographer and the writer for Life magazine, then by the far most prominent photojournalist publication in the world. Parks would remain at Life for 2 decades, chronicling subjects related to racism, poverty, as well as taking memorable pictures of celebrities and politicians, including Muhammad Ali, Malcolm X, Adam Clayton Powell Jr., and Stokely Carmichael. His most famous images, such as Emerging Man, printed in 1952, and American Gothic, 1942, capture the essence of activism and humanitarianism in 20th century America, and have become iconic images, defining their era for later generations. They also rallied support for the burgeoning civil rights movement, for which Parks himself was a tireless advocate as well as a documentarian. Parks spent much of his last 3 decades of his life expanding his style. He continued working up until his death in 2006, winning numerous awards, including the National Medal of Arts in 1988 and other 50 honorary doctorates. He was also a noted composer and author, and in 1969 became the first African-American to write and direct a Hollywood feature film based on his best-selling novel, The Learning Tree. This was followed in 1971 by the hugely successful motion picture Shaft. The core of his accomplishment, however, remains his photography, the scope, quality, and enduring national significance of which is reflected throughout the collection at the Gordon Parks Foundation. He left a legacy here in St. Paul with the alternative high school named Gordon Parks High School. I'd like to close with a poem that Gordon Parks wrote called The Funeral. After many snows, I was home again. Time had whittled down to mere hills, the great mountains of my childhood. Raging rivers I once swam trickled now like gentle streams, and the wide road carving onto China or Kansas City or perhaps Calcutta had withered to a crooked path of dust, ending abruptly at the county burial ground. Only the giant that was my father remained the same. 100 strong men strained beneath his coffin when they bore him to his grave. Thank you.
I Announcements. The lady from Hennepin, Majority Leader Peppin.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker and members. I move that when the House adjourns today, it adjourns until 3:30 p.m. Monday, February 20th, 2017.
Representative Peppin moves that when the House adjourns, it adjourns until 3:30 p.m. Monday, February 20th, 2017. All those in favor say aye. Opposed say no. The motion prevails. Representative Peppin.
I move that the House do now adjourn.
Representative Peppin moves that the House do now adjourn. All those in favor say aye. All those opposed say no. The motion prevails and the House stands adjourned until 3:30 p.m. Monday, February 20th, 2017. We are adjourned.